We're waiting,
No,
waiting.
now we're live.
Is it
Yeah.
live yet?
I think we're
Did
live.
it communicate?
It's going out to the ethers. It's going
Is it going
out
out to the ethers?
It is.
And wait, yes, there it is. Now I see it. It took me longer on mine apparently than it did yours.
Well, I think it starts from the ocean, so it hits
starts
me first in San Pedro, and then it takes a while to get to your neighborhood. So.
Well, true. I'm further inland. So, welcome back, Ron. Welcome back from your trip from Italy. It's good to have you back in the co-host seat because you're always my funny. You're my funny to my serious, and we have lots to talk about today, starting with the January 6th committee hearing that we just had this morning. Lots of interesting updates there. We're going to talk a little bit about the LA City Council. This has made national headlines now, even though it's a local city council election. We had several racist remarks coming out of the LA City Council, and not only that, they were actually trying to gerrymander districts to disenfranchise black voters for, a decade probably or more.
Isn't it just such a wonderful web of just like, we were just all innocent, just trying to pass racist policies, and we just happened to say a bunch of racist things too, and you're mad at us? Why?
Right, and interestingly enough, Nuri Martinez, she initially only resigned her presidency. She didn't resign from the council, but she has absolutely now resigned from the council. Kevin De Leon should be following. I don't see how he comes back from this. Put a pitchfork in their careers. They're over. There is no politics after this, in my opinion. Anyway, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Yeah. Digital rights stuff, and then I want to get updates from you. You were in Italy, where they've kind of shifted to the far right there in their new election. So I do want to talk a little bit about that. So people are, still chiming in here. But let's get started.
Smash the like button.
Yes.
That like button said, "What are you gonna do about this? I just insulted your mom," and you're like, "What like button? I'm gonna smash you. You've been smashed. Liked. Smash that like button, folks. Don't forget."
Don't forget. That's how we get up, I guess, in the algorithm, so to speak. So January 6th committee, I don't know if everybody was tuning in to this morning. It is supposedly the last one. I'm wondering now if they're going to add one. Lots of things happened. I think one of the most...
might get renewed.
Might get what?
I said the season might get renewed. We'll see.
The season might... The season might get renewed. I think there's lots there to renew. They've now subpoenaed Trump, which we're going to talk about too. But let's start with this clip. I have some clips here that I thought were important to share, so you don't have to watch the full, 2-hour thing. You can just watch our stream and know what happened. The first one I want to play is basically Trump did not want people to know that he lost. So let's play this clip. It's very interesting because now we've gone from a guy that is, I won, there's no way I didn't lose, to basically admitting that he lost, but he just didn't want to know that people lost.
Cassidy Hutchison, an aide to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, was present for that conversation and described it in this way.
This is the day that the Supreme Court had rejected that case. Mr. Meadows and I were in the White House residence at a Christmas reception. And as we were walking back from the Christmas reception that evening, the president was walking out of the Oval Office, so we crossed paths in the Rose Garden colonnade. The president was fired up about the Supreme Court decision. And so I was standing next to Mr. Meadows, but I stepped back, so I was probably 2-3 feet catty corner from him, diagonal from him. The president's just raging about the decision and how it's wrong and why didn't we make more calls, and just his typical anger outburst at this decision. And the president said, he had said something to the effect of, "I don't want people to know we lost, Mark. This is embarrassing. Figure it out. We need to figure it out. I don't want people to know that we lost."
What do you say about that?
What a fun event for a holiday party. You just have right? Trump railing. I think it really does speak to, just the cult following that guy has. That he's just like, hey, everything going on in the world that says I lost this election, that's meaningless unless we own up to it. That's the only way. They can't know. They can't know.
And it's interesting to me because the signs were all there, but the cult that's so committed to believing this, they're committed. It's that simple. I want to talk about the Secret Service too. Related to that, they showed a Secret Service email. Let's put that up on the screen. Just FYI, POTUS is pissed. Breaking news, Supreme Court denied his lawsuit. He is livid now, probably no remarks. Ha ha ha.
This is just, this is the big club we're not in. Really, it's like this is just sort of a game to people this powerful. And, it's sort of an ego thing. And that's why, I still, and I know there's like more to talk about as far as what happened today, but I'm still in the camp of, I just am very, very skeptical that this is going to lead to anything at all.
Right.
Maybe like a fine or something. And I just feel like, and I will say this, the element about the kind of theatrical end of this that really frustrates me some is that, earlier this morning, I saw a clip of maybe a girl who is running against Adam Schiff here in California. Adam Schiff is absolutely terrible. He might as well be a Republican. He is among the worst. And maybe just, dunked on him big time in a debate. And she just called it all out. She's just like, look, you are a warmonger. You've never seen a war you didn't like. You supported the Patriot Act. You're letting things go to rot in your district. And, we need a new direction. And she crushed it. It was beautiful. And then you see people like Adam Schiff getting up there, enjoying their time in the spotlight, going, Trump's bad. And in your heart of hearts that especially in that district, in like the Burbank area, there's so many just wine sipping neoliberals who are going to be like, he makes us feel good and protects our tax bracket, and they're going to go vote for him. And that's what maybe he's up against. And Tina, I hate to.
Although she did quite well in the primary.
I know, but she's up against him. She did well in the primary, making it to the runoff. But it's like she's up against that behemoth. I'm rooting for her big time, but it's like when you see charades like this, and that it's helping people like him, you can't help but feel a little frustrated. Where it's just like, this is probably not going to lead to much of anything as far as Trump is concerned. But meanwhile, it's like,
so you think it's just generally like, political theater?
I think a lot of it is. I think it is not quite political theater as far as the, impeachment song and dances were like that song and dance.
Well, I think this is much more serious.
I agree. So I'm not putting it in that camp, but I'm still very weary that we're going to see much of anything here. Again, like we talked yesterday, Jordan and I did. I'm predicting fine. I think he gets some kind of like fine that they sort of like reach some sort of settlement, and it's some fine that's not really going to face him at all at the end of the day. That's my guess.
I have absolutely no guess, to be frank.
That's fair.
I really don't. I feel like we're in this strange uncharted territory at this point. The events of the last 2 years have been pretty wild. I agree. I think what was interesting about this morning's hearing as well, it was that, the Secret Service, I just showed that one email, but there was a plethora of information that came out today on internal Secret Service documents, emails, correspondence, and whatnot. And it seems to me that they knew a lot more about what was going to happen than what they've let on previously. Have they been hiding that they knew? I'm trying to figure out, where that falls into this. So I wanted to look at some of those things. Also, McEnany testified that Trump wanted to be part of the January 6th march on the Capitol. So they played that today. Let's play that clip.
Here's Kayleigh McEnany, the White House press secretary, describing an exchange she had with the president as soon as he arrived back at the White House.
So to the best of my recollection, I recall him being saying that he wanted to physically walk and be a part of the march, and then saying that he would ride the beast if he needed to, ride in the presidential limo.
I know, right? The beast.
He just appointed himself to be able to do that.
Also, hang on a second, Colin. There's some folks are saying the sound isn't working properly.
What'd you do to your microphone?
Nothing. It's StreamYard.
Break it?
Sometimes StreamYard automatically dims when there's more than one mic. Sometimes it happens
on the
a
ones
lot.
and twos.
Colin's
It sounds fine. It sounds fine right now. It might be something like maybe if you both talk at the same time, StreamYard will be like trying to mute one of you, kind of.
It's very frustrating. It's like, Holly, we're doing the best we can. Yeah, StreamYard does this, and I don't know how to make it stop.
I will try to not
All right.
talk at the same time as you.
Yeah, don't talk over me, Ron. It's your fault.
I know.
Anyway, all right. I just wanted to make sure we could adjust that. Okay, sounds better now. All right. Okay, where were we in that? Yeah, the beast. The beast. So, obviously he wanted to be part and parcel to this. And also a friendly reminder that they didn't want people to go through the metal detectors, right? There was that whole group that was outside. And he has said multiple times, like, no, don't force them to go through the metal detectors. I mean, that's sort of kind of a smoking gun to the fact that he knew that some of these folks were armed. And we're going to get into this in a second. There were Secret Service messages going back and forth about spotting people with weapons, including a guy that was in a tree, which I thought was kind of like, there's a guy in a tree with a gun. Okay, here we are. All right, so also Cipollini, he more or less knew... he wanted Trump to leave, but knew that Trump wasn't going to leave. He's obviously his attorney. He has attorney-client privilege, so he can't necessarily disclose everything that he was saying in conversation with him. But let's play this clip because I think it's kind of telling.
Talk about conversations with the president, but I can generically say that I said, people need to be told. There needs to be a public announcement, fast, that they need to leave the Capitol.
And Pat, could you let us know approximately when you said that?
Approximately when? Almost immediately after I found out people were getting into the Capitol or approaching the Capitol in a way that was violent.
You on the staff did not want people to leave the Capitol.
On the staff?
In the White House.
I can't think of anybody on that day who didn't want people to get out of the Capitol once particularly once the violence started. No. I mean,
what about the president?
Yeah.
Well, she said the staff. So I answered.
No, I said in the White House.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought you said who else on the staff. I can't reveal communications, but obviously I think,
Yeah.
What was that? What did we just watch? If you know in the chat what the fuck that just was, please let us know. That guy was, oh, you meant the staff? You just
Yeah, he was willing to say all the staff wanted to leave, but when he was directly asked by the president, he obviously couldn't answer that question.
Did he know where he was? Did they pass out a lot of indica before that entire thing? Was there a lag? Were they having internet problems?
No, Ron, I think in his mind, he's parsing attorney-client privilege. What am I allowed to say here? What can't I say? What's a lie? I can't really lie if I open my mouth like that. You could see him all of the wheels turning there.
I mean, I hope so. I wasn't sure what was going on. I mean, it was just that had more dead air than a college radio show. I don't know what that was.
More dead.
Is there
a lot of dead air in a college radio show?
I mean, there was when I was on one, but that was because we were stupid. I mean, we were never sober. Anyway. Continue.
Well, I mean, I think the point being is that there was obviously Trump was getting a lot of advice that he was ignoring. You know, he was committed to this idea, and I think we knew he knew.
Why would he change now? I feel like
right.
he just described his entire life. You definitely described his entire presidency. I mean, yeah, of course.
No, fair
advice
point.
that he was ignoring. What he's done his whole life.
Is that what's going to be on his tombstone?
Yeah, he was given reasonable advice. He ignored all of it. I mean, he's the kind of guy where it's just like, you were born with the silver spoon, and it's like, okay, don't shove this up your ass. And he's like, I'm going to shove it up my ass. Like, that's the one thing you weren't supposed to do. I'm going to shove it up my ass 6 times. That's all your bankruptcies. You're out of bankruptcies.
You're killing me, Ron. Welcome back from Italy, by the way.
Thank you.
All right, let's turn to the section on the Secret Service, because I thought this was also very telling. You know, people like to or want to believe that our law enforcement, and I think we all know that this is pretty much not true, but people want to believe that law enforcement is innately unbiased, that they are looking to apply justice across the board, that they always behave, every single officer always behaves in a fashion that's, professional, whatnot. But this was a really interesting look into what actually happens behind closed doors. You know, obviously Trump had appointed somebody to his chief of staff that was an Secret Service agent, but they had some correspondence that they showed today during the meeting. So I want to play several clips of this. The first one is a chat from January 6th, in which they say basically POTUS just tweeted about Pence, probably not to be good for Pence. So let's play that.
The documents we obtained from the Secret Service make clear that the crowd outside the magnetometers was armed and the agents knew it. Take a look at what they were seeing and hearing on the ground. One report from the rally site at 7:58 a.m. said, some members of the crowd are wearing ballistic helmets, body armor, carrying radio equipment, and military-grade backpacks. Another from 9:30 a.m. said that there were possibly OC spray, meaning pepper spray, and or plastic riot shields. At 11:23 a.m., agents also reported possible armed individuals, one with a Glock, one with a rifle. Over the next hour, agents reported possible man with a gun reported, confirmed pistol on hip located in a tree, and one detained at 14th and I Street Northwest. Individual had an assault rifle on his person.
All right, and there's even more. There's another one that happened at 10:39. Alert at 10:22 regarding the VP being a dead man walking if he doesn't do the right thing. So they clearly were corresponding, knew what was happening. Colin, let's play the next one.
If I had seen something like that, I probably would have flipped it to someone at the White House. If I had seen some of that nature, I would have said, we got to flag this for Secret Service or something of that nature.
But the Trump administration was aware of this type of violent rhetoric prior to January 6th. In fact, as we have seen, the Secret Service and other agencies knew of the prospect of violence well in advance of the president's speech at the Ellipse. Despite this, certain White House and Secret Service witnesses previously testified that they had received no intelligence about violence that could have potentially threatened any of the protectees on January 6th, including the vice president. Evidence strongly suggests that this testimony is not credible, and the committee is reviewing additional material from the Secret Service and other sources.
So, it is incredible. I think that obviously there was plenty of information that we're now seeing that the opposite is true. What do you think's going on there, Ron?
Well, I mean, first of all, this is sort of par for the course. Law enforcement. I mean, I was like, when the cops and the Proud Boys were fighting, it just goes to show you people should never meet their heroes. Cops and law enforcement, they see those types of white nationalists, they see them as friendlies. They describe them as friendlies. You've uncovered...
Sometimes, yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
And it's not, I mean, I don't even give them the benefit of sometimes, because it's a systemic disease, and that's the system. Those are the friendlies. If January 6th was, like a bunch of Antifa people marching, it would have been a lot different.
Yeah.
It would have been a lot. I don't disagree. It was different when it was Black Lives Matter. It was a lot different. That's deliberate. Those are their friendlies. And to call back to a little earlier, this is the type of stuff that frustrates me because there's a bunch of people sitting around in Adam Schiff's district, sipping their red wine, going, "Look at him saving our democracy. He stands for nothing, but I'm ignoring that right now because he's saying things about Trump and Trump's bad. So I'm going to go vote for him so he can continue to do nothing except help out the war machine and the CIA because that's all that guy has done for years." And this is why this whole charade is frustrating to me. It's very frustrating to me.
It is frustrating. I mean, also that they know that they were armed. So, but there's also another tension here, Ron. Obviously, so you had the Capitol Police that was actually, fighting with these guys. And then you had the Secret Service knowing that there were other armed individuals outside of the, what are they called? The scanners, metal detectors. So, I mean, it's just wild to me that this was happening. They obviously had a situation with Mike Pence. He was, deemed as somebody that could have been very much hurt. Now, what's actually even wild to me is how Mike Pence is now treating that situation. You see him tweeting now, stuff that was like he's got Stockholm syndrome, right? Where he's basically sort of in denial about what was going on January 6th. But it's just wild that all of these things are coming together, and you're seeing these documents released, and obviously the Secret Service lied when they said that there was no credible threats. There obviously were. You see the chats beforehand where the Proud Boys were talking about, what they were going to do. And you saw intelligence that the Secret Service had that they showed today in the meeting as well, where they knew that the Proud Boys were talking in advance and had seen their plan. So none of that was true.
Those are friendlies. Those are friendlies. I mean, really, it is that simple to me in this regard. Okay. Those are friendlies. And it was, you can go back to Charlottesville. It was the same thing in Charlottesville. Like the security they had for, the white supremacists versus Antifa and everyone else.
Listen, even the FBI has documented that there's a right-wing extremism is definitely infiltrated local law enforcement. I don't think that's up for debate. But in this particular situation, I guess what's strange to me is that it's the Secret Service, not the Capitol Police.
It goes all the way up.
I get it. It's just wild, though.
And you of all people, you've lived through so much of this stuff. They've been doing this for years and years and years. If you go back to, when David Duke put the suit on and said, okay, we're going to get badges and guns, and that's how we build power. Right. It's been happening. It's still been happening.
No, and it's not just David Duke. Tom Metzger,
of course not.
Richard Spencer.
Absolutely. The list goes on and on. They told us stuff as far back as Ferguson. They were revealing all the KKK members with badges and guns. Nothing freaking happened. Nothing happened. It got worse and worse and worse and worse. And then guess what happened? Trump won, which emboldened these people. That emboldened these people. And now they're still just as emboldened because guess what? Biden loves cops too. He loves them. Fund the police, not defund, right? So
right, and here's the interesting thing. Like I feel like we're going off into a little digression tangent here, which is fine. I've been asking a lot of the activists lately, like, should we abolish the police? Because I sort of want to get everybody's opinion on this matter. And most of them
me? I'm a
no, yes. I know you're yes, but most of them actually do say no because they do want people to investigate, serial killers, rape, like serious crime, right?
Well, I guess they have a different definition of what that means than I do.
Right.
That, because I don't think when I say abolish the police, I don't mean we're not going to have any law and order. I mean we need to get rid of the current system we have and start over again. Yeah. That's what I mean when I say abolish.
Right. So, but then like the right-wing extremists, when they hear that, they don't understand that it doesn't compute, right? So,
of course not.
So some people would say that's maybe a version of reform. Like, so the question becomes like, can the sheriff's department be reformed or not? I think. No. I don't think I'm going out on a limb here. I agree with you. No, on this. I think they're just so corrupted to the core that it just needs to be wiped away and replaced with something else. But
when is this about? And we're definitely getting off on something. We're definitely getting off on like a side thing that should be its own episode on a different day. But when you think about like when something is just rotten to its core and it's like a burning building, for instance, do you say, oh, we have to salvage this build? Well, everything's just gutted out, like it's completely,
Right.
you know, like all the floors are just burnt up to the gills. And are you like, well, we could salvage this and we're gonna reform it, or do you say, well, no, we need to like start all over again? And when you think about when you take
Really
a step
rethink
back
it,
and
yeah.
realize what the job of a police officer is in the United States, it's absurd. It's absurd that somebody who is barely screened, poorly trained, is
Yeah.
put in 1,000,005 situations, although most
That
of the
they
time
don't know how to handle. I agree
that
with
they
you.
don't know how to
yeah.
handle, although most
I
of the
agree.
time they're just stopping people for speeding or they're supposed to pick up
Right.
litter. I don't know if any of them actually do. It's absurd. So it's
Yeah.
like you got to take a step back and realize really this system is just in place to aid the powerful. This is about
Right.
systemic racism. This is about oppression. This isn't about serving and protecting, because even people with good intentions, guess what? You're setting them up to fail. That's why most people with good intentions, they're not cops
Leave.
for very long. They
Yeah, no,
leave,
they
or they
leave.
get forced out, or they become a bad apple. So it's not just a couple bad apples. No, it's a systemic freaking disease. It has to be done away with, and you need to start again. And
Right.
that systemic disease, to tie it back to the original topic,
Right.
that systemic disease is why something like January 6th is able to happen.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a fair analysis. All right. Let's go to the next clip.
I was stunned by violence and was stunned by the president's apparent indifference to the violence. And now is the time for the president to be presidential. I thought he failed at doing it. I thought he failed at a critical time to be the sort of leader that the nation needed.
I think the events at the Capitol, however they occurred, were shocking. And it was something that, as I mentioned in my statement, that I could not put aside. And at a particular point, the events were such that it was impossible for me to continue, given my personal values and my philosophy. I came as an immigrant to this country. I believe in this country. I believe in a peaceful transfer of power. I believe in democracy. And so it was a decision that I made on my own.
So that's Mulvaney at the beginning there, his chief of staff, basically, saying, again, we're on that same theme, right? He gave Trump advice that Trump chose to ignore, followed by Elaine, who basically said, this violence wasn't acceptable. I wasn't okay with this. So here you have a bunch of people we're still continuing to see surrounding, the Trump administration falling on deaf ears. But I know what you're going to say.
That's what he did. He did that for 4 years. Like what? People are making, he didn't give a shit. Totally out of character. Yeah. You don't say.
You don't say.
I'm not trying to make light of what happened that day. I'm really not.
No, I know you're not.
They've been they've been going around on a hamster wheel for so long.
Yeah.
And it's like, how many of these frickin' sound clips do you need? And if you really wanted to, do something as far as justice is concerned, the whole question should have stayed with, did Trump incite violence, which you need a court procedure to determine. You can't just say, yes, he did, and point to it. You need to have a procedure around it. They could have had that procedure multiple times already. They chose not to. Instead, well, now it's about, like, what are these documents all about and stuff like that. And we'll see what happens. I mean, I have a feeling it's not going to lead to much. But, it seems like the web just keeps keep adding layers to this web, really.
Yeah, 100%.
And you can't help, after the complete charade fan fiction that was Russiagate, followed by the charade fan fiction that was the impeachment musical. It was a music. They had a musical number at one point. They did. The guy from frickin' Hamilton. Which, by the way, really historically accurate thing. By the way, Hamilton, it was great. But like they had a little musical charade the one day.
That's right. I'd forgotten about that.
You can't, Eddie. Yeah. So I know that I am the most skeptical of the bunch, and I'm happy to wear that. I think eventually we need to make a small wager. Maybe it could be dinner.
You and I.
Maybe you, me, Joe, everybody.
Okay.
Everybody. Calling on the ones and twos is in on this too.
All right. This is a Status Coup poll.
Over under a Status Coup poll.
Okay.
And it's just like, what's going to happen? And then it's just like,
I literally don't know though, Ron. I don't have a strong opinion in any direction. I don't know where.
Well, you gotta weigh in on this poll. So you don't have to do it right now, but eventually you're gonna have to put some bandwidth into this. Then Jordan will have his thing. I'll have my thing. Colin will have his, Jordan, you, Colin. Then it'll go to me, and it'll just be like a frowny face, and I'll draw a dick on my face or something. And we will all have a bet. And we'll see who wins.
That's so funny. All right, so I get you're going with fine. That's probable, I think. I would like to see jail time, but I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think you're wrong on that. Well, that leaves us to our next thing. Except that I think Colin had to run away for a second. Right. Yeah, somebody came to his door. So we'll come back. I want to play one more video.
Colin, I can't believe it.
So Colin's moving right now. So he's literally trying to move his house while he's working full time. God bless him. We run him ragged around here. I know we do. But the next thing I want to talk about is the fact that they are going to subpoena Trump now. They did a resolution. The votes were 9-0 that they're going to subpoena Trump to come testify. And then, of course, Trump had his response on Truth Social because that's where he's living now.
Do we have a response?
We do. As soon as Colin gets back, we will put it up on
the
screen.
I am rubber, you are glue. Like, what's his response? What did he say?
He didn't say that.
Is it just a selfie of him in a Carmen Sandiego hat? That'd be freaking hilarious. Is that what it is?
He did call them, I'll give you a teaser, he did call them the Unselect Committee. He's obviously...
I don't know. Maybe it's because I've been out of the country for a little bit, but it's like when you have a kind of bird's eye view, you realize just how absurd it really is. Not that you don't know that even when you live here, but sometimes it's like you go outside, you're just like, wow, yeah, what a freaking circus! Holy shit!
No, it is a circus.
What a weird experiment in human history we are, huh? What the hell?
But Ron, is also why I can't really put my thumb on what's going to be the eventual outcome here. Tina,
you just gotta own the bet. I mean, you might win, you might lose, but what really counts.
I'll probably lose no matter what I pick, because whatever I pick, the opposite will happen. That's just the way things have been going the last 2 years. Is like just when you think you've seen the craziest thing ever, boom, there's something that's even crazier. I mean, this is sort of how things are going these days. So
yeah, I've stopped trying to guess where the floor is. I just wake up every day and be like, well, here's hoping. We'll see what happens today.
Here's hoping. All right, let's see if Colin's back. If not, we can shift gears and talk about Italy for a second. I do want to talk about Italy. You were there.
Yeah.
Colin is back.
Colin,
let's play they're going to subpoena Trump video.
Mr. Chairman, at some point, the Department of Justice may well unearth the facts that these and other witnesses are currently concealing. But our duty today is to our country and our children and our Constitution. We are obligated to seek answers directly from the man who set this all in motion. And every American is entitled to those answers, so we can act now to protect our republic. So this afternoon, I am offering this resolution that the committee direct the chairman to issue a subpoena for relevant documents and testimony under oath from Donald John Trump in connection with the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. If there's no further debate, the question is on agreeing to the resolution. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed is no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Cheney.
Aye.
Ms. Cheney, aye. Ms. Lofgren.
Aye.
Ms. Lofgren, aye. Mr. Schiff.
Aye.
Mr. Schiff, aye. Mr. Aguilar.
Aye.
Mr. Aguilar, aye. Mrs. Murphy.
Aye.
Mrs. Murphy, aye. Mr. Raskin.
Aye.
Mr. Raskin, aye. Mrs. Luria.
Aye.
Mrs. Luria, aye. Mr. Kinzinger.
Kinzinger, aye.
Mr. Kinzinger, aye. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Oh man, I'm glad we watched all of them say aye, because otherwise we wouldn't have known what happened. How would we have known otherwise? I mean, they said everyone said aye, but I'm glad.
I think it's just a formality. Sometimes they want recorded votes. Now, of course, if it's something we want them to record votes on.
I was dancing to it. It was very rhythmic. What were you doing? Were you? I was rocking out to that.
I'm trying to figure out how we fix StreamYard because people are still saying when you talk, like it dims out my mic. It's very, very frustrating. StreamYard, fix this. Anyway, having said that, let's put up the response Trump had from Truth Social today. All right, there it is. Why didn't the Unselect Committee ask me to testify months ago? Why did they wait until the very end, the final moments of their last meeting? Because the committee is a total bust that has only served to further divide our country, which, by the way, is doing very badly. A laughing stock all over the world.
Why does he have a question mark there?
I don't know.
To answer your question, Doc,
are we?
Yes, we are. We are, in fact, but we have been for a very long time. We have been for, God, how many years? Like, I'd say at least 40 at this point.
I mean, to imagine that we weren't a laughingstock when Trump was president is pretty really, Trump? Come on now. So that's his response. We'll see what happens from that. Do you think that if they subpoena him, we had Roger Stone do the fifth the entire time. We've had other folks do that. I'm wondering if they're going to have another meeting now, even though this was supposed to be the last one.
He might just plead the fifth and say aye the whole time.
It's
right. Fifth, aye, fifth, and then
and that's that.
And then
I don't think much is going to come from this. I thought it was interesting that they are subpoenaing Trump. This would be the fourth time in history that a president has been subpoenaed. This is just an unusual step, so it's historic for that reason. But I don't think anything is going to really substantial come from this.
I mean, he didn't straight up say no, but he didn't really, it doesn't seem like he really cares either. He's just sort of like, well, why didn't you ask for this months ago? And then
why didn't you ask for this months ago? It's a bust. I don't think it's a bust because
bust was in all caps. So and there were quotations. He's mixing it up. So.
Hey, Colin, people are still complaining about the mic thing.
It's just an intermittent thing. You're fine for the most part. I'll have to just talk to StreamYard later and see if there's something we can do.
All right. Sorry, guys. It's this function that automatically happens in StreamYard. It's very frustrating. All right. Having said that, shall we move on to the LA City Council?
Yeah.
Let's move on to the LA City Council. It's interesting that we had the president commenting on this because generally you don't see a president comment on city council situations. It's just not something that's done. So for people that have not been paying attention, basically what happened is on Sunday afternoon, somebody leaked audio. It was a little over an hour long of a meeting in which we had three city council members not only making racist remarks, Nuri Martinez, she's now resigned, who was the president of the LA City Council, basically called another council person's son who is black a monkey, amongst other things. She said that the kid should have a beat down for his behavior. And then when speaking with other members of the city council and a labor leader named Herrera, so the other two were Gil Cedillo and Kevin De Leon, they were basically plotting a way to gerrymander the city council districts to disenfranchise black voters. Mike Bonin was described as somebody that is, quote unquote, with the blacks. Yeah. I think for folks that don't know much about Mike Bonin, he has been a champion for homeless rights on the city council. He's been one of the few folks, I'd say Raman as well. You know, whether or not you agree with everything they do, I think that they have both been voices for, against some of the, you know, neoliberal. They're pretty much the only members. I mean, honestly, the only people who voted against 1411, which was Bonin, Nithya Raman, and then there was one other person who I'm blanking on. But it's like basically those are the only members. I mean, we have 15 members of city council in Los Angeles, and about 3 of them are actually trying to be decent at their job and are actually trying to do the right thing. And Mike Bonin is one of them. That's why I do think it's very, very telling the true disdain his colleagues showed for him. I agree. And that's why, because he genuinely wants to do a good job. He genuinely, and it's really sad that he's going to be leaving. He's leaving. That's a good point, Ron. So 4118, let's talk about that for a second, because folks aren't going to know what you mean by that. 4018 was a bill that the city council passed that pretty much criminalized poverty. They set up areas where you could not camp that pretty much redlined almost the entire city. So nowhere near. Yeah. To give people like a really brief, it was sold under the guise of, we're just making it that homeless people can't be near schools, which, first of all, nobody who's not authorized to be there can be in a school. Like so that just doesn't make any sense. What it really did, though, was it criminalized just being homeless in about 30% of the frickin' city. Which I'm saying way more than 30%. Well, I mean, I don't know. According to Kenneth Mejia's map, it was about that, but that's on top of what they already had. So I mean, you know, regardless of like the actual. Well, okay, fair. A lot of area. On his map, you'd also have to take into consideration where people have houses and other things. Like I'm ruling out all that stuff too. Like it really limited the areas of public open space where people could be, and this is a time in which homelessness is absolutely on the increase, not only because of just COVID, that put a lot of people into dire straits financially, but also because you cannot pay rent in the city of LA if you work minimum wage or close to minimum wage. It's just too expensive. We had the situation that happened at Echo Park Lake that I had covered, would be a prime example. I interviewed homeless folks there. Several of them were students. 2 of them were students at UCLA. Another worked a night shift. So the reason she was there is she couldn't participate in Project Room Key because, they have these programs, but there's all these rules attached to the programs. And one of them is you have to be in the hotel room prior to 7 p.m. at night. Well, if you work the, night shift, that's just not a possibility. So there's plenty of reasons why people find themselves in this position. Uber drivers that can't afford to pay rent, sleeping in their cars. I mean, we can go through the list. The idea that it's strictly homeless folks are strictly alcoholics, drug abusers, criminals, but it's just not true. It's just not true. This is where we're at in the city. The city has failed to respond to this problem. And so point I'm getting at is Mike Bonin was one of the guys that was trying to do something about this. He's choosing not to run for re-election because it's so damn toxic. So that he had already said he wasn't running for election. There's no real good reason for these folks to attack him at this point, but they did it anyway. All right, so that's the background so everybody understands. I want to play a couple of clips. The first one I'm going to play is there was the first city council meeting after Sunday, after this was leaked, and it was making headlines across the country. Obviously, people showed up in large amounts to protest the city council on Tuesday morning. I was there. So let's play part of that, Colin.
No hate in LA! No hate in LA! No hate in LA! No hate in LA! No hate in LA!
What we have heard from the city council members is despicable. It does not encourage unity. It does not encourage collaboration. It encourages hate. It encourages division. And as you see, as all of us are here standing here, we're here in unity. Different groups, different backgrounds, in different areas, but we're here in unity. And that's what we should be preaching to the youth of tomorrow, is unity. We shouldn't be preaching hate or bashing separatist ideals. like my colleague said, we are calling for a full resignation. Not a resignation just from the position, but a full resignation of all council members and individuals and affiliates who heard this go on and did not do anything. Because that makes not only Los Angeles look horrible, but it's a ripple effect to all municipalities around California.
Let us in! 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 Let us in!
Look, you scared little piggies!
Let us in!
Yeah, let us in! Fuck that, man!
I'm sorry, I didn't fix the wall.
You alright?
Yeah, I didn't think it's a lean so I don't fall in the middle of it.
You organized the press conference this morning. I noticed the theme through this wasn't just about the racist remarks that these council members made, but also the fact they were engaging in power struggle gerrymandering to disenfranchise black voters. Is that the more egregious thing, in your opinion?
I think it's a combination of both. We see the rhetoric and we see their tactics that have been used throughout this city to keep suppressing the black and brown community, keep dividing the black and brown community. I don't think it's one or the other. I think they're in tandem.
Yeah, they are in tandem. Anyway, that's part of the clip. If you want to see the full coverage, we have the video up, obviously, on Status Coup. So, Ron, they ended up not letting a lot of people into the city council meeting. They even stopped letting people in with press credentials. I was standing next to the person from CBS, and we're like, okay, I guess we're locked out. Yeah. As you saw in the video, they put a piece of board in between the door so that people couldn't break through. For a second there, I thought maybe they might. That didn't happen. So they ended up having a full protest outside of the city hall with lots of speakers. They did a small march. And then later on that day, Nuri resigned from her city council position. The other two have not.
Yeah, they still haven't. I mean, and just to like kind of tell people, this is the straw that broke the camel's back, because LA city politics, especially since Garcetti's been at the helm. Fortunately, he's going away. Hopefully, we don't get Rick Caruso, because he'll be even worse. But
Caruso will be worse.
Caruso would be worse. Karen Bass won't be much better, but you know,
I think she'll be a little better. Yeah,
she'll be. I mean, well, we can get into like LA specific stuff another time, but like staying on this, you know, this is the straw that broke the camel's back, because they have just been playing with the city as their playground for developers, using homeless people and the most marginalized in Los Angeles as pawns to just try to, you know, drive up land prices or drive them down depending on what they want to do and what development deals they're making. It's a scam, and they've been doing it for years. And this is the straw that broke the camel's back. And, you know, I'm glad that Nuri has resigned. Obviously, the other two need to. I think Cadillo's going to lose anyway soon. Pretty likely.
Yeah, so he was already losing his election in the primary. He did not do well against Unisys, who is his challenger. Mitch O'Farrell lost his primary challenge, too, to Hugo Martinez. So I agree. A lot of these folks were already not popular in their districts. And you're correct on, in fact, we should probably do we could do an episode dedicated to this. Land development money, real estate development money has long ruled the city. Huizar is not the only example of that. Obviously, he's been indicted by the FBI for federal corruption probe, taking land development money and giving up, quid pro quo. So it is part and parcel to why we don't have affordable housing in the city. That's just not a controversial statement. So yes, these things are all related. I want to also play the clip from the Biden's press secretary even commenting on this last week or a couple days ago.
The president is glad to see that one of the participants in that conversation has resigned, but they all should. He believes that they all should resign. The language that was used and tolerated during that conversation was unacceptable, and it was appalling. They should all step down.
Yep.
What do you make of that?
I mean, look, I don't like Biden. I'm no Biden fan. And if we're going to talk racism, dude's got enough skeletons in his closet to decorate for Halloween coming up. But I appreciate him saying that. I'm glad, or his press secretary. I mean, I'm glad that the president made a statement in this case. I really am, because they all need to go.
They all need to go. I agree. I don't think there's any coming back from this.
Absolutely. And he didn't have to say anything. He did. I do appreciate that. And I hope, I mean, it's mainly De Leon, because the other, Gil's probably going to lose anyway. But De Leon, he needs to go. And that guy I know a lot of people were swindled by that guy at one point. I never was, just for the record. I always thought he was a phony. And getting booed out of a meeting.
That's right. He was booed out of the city council meeting.
He was booed out of the city council meeting. Yeah. That is the ending his political stain of a career deserves. That is exactly what it deserves. They all need to resign. And shout out to all the activists in Los Angeles, the People's City Council, and everyone who has literally been shutting down meetings. They shut down the meeting. They shut down 2 meetings. And guess what? Yeah. They already canceled tomorrow. They're not even.
Well, they didn't make quorum yesterday, so they tried to have a city council meeting yesterday, and they didn't make quorum. So
they couldn't do it. And they
couldn't do
Friday. They canceled Friday. So at least I saw something online that they canceled Friday. And so, I mean, that's what needs to happen. Like this cannot be tolerated. Mike Bonin has said they need to step down. Other members of the council have signed a thing. I mean, I think only 2 members of the city council have not called on them to resign. I know Joe Buscaino's one. And that's
your guy's won.
That guy's in my district. Well, I'll tell you what, Tina, when I just first saw the headline that there was racist audio,
you thought it was him.
I assumed it was him. I was like, well, Buscaino's on his way out anyway. I assumed it was Joey Buckets. I was shocked when it wasn't. That's probably why he didn't ask them to step down. He had FOMO over the whole thing. But but anyway, so they need to resign. They need to resign.
Yeah, they need to resign. I agree. I think they eventually will. I don't see how you have a political career after this. So for folks that have not heard this audio, Knock LA has it up. You can go listen to some of the clips, but it is that devastating. It's horrifying. So we'll see what happens. I'll keep my eye on that. But now Mitch O'Farrell's taking over the presidency, which I thought was an odd thing, given that
he's so popular.
He's going to probably lose his election. He didn't. Hugo Martinez had more votes than he did it during the primary, and I'm assuming that that's just going to be more. There's going to be more votes for Hugo even now. So, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I don't see Mitch pulling through on his election. So,
well, that's the thing. I mean, hopefully, we're going to see some changes in the city council, and again, there should be some good gains. We got to keep up that momentum and get those victories. Unfortunately, we're also going to have some losses too, because Mike Bonin's not sticking around. So it's not all going to be a net gain. But, when you look at, Martinez and Unisses and Kenneth Mejia, there's definitely some things that are going to change in the city council. There is a change, and it's happening, and that's huge because, this has just gone on for too freaking long. And it's just, the city cannot continue to keep being run like this.
No, it can't be. And I think what's also interesting about the situation for outsiders that look in, their initial thing is either they're shocked or they're using it as a tool. Like if you're the GOP, this is an obvious gift. All of these folks are Democrats.
Yeah.
So for us that live in Los Angeles, this is not shocking. There has always been racism inside the Democratic Party here locally. That's not a surprise, right? But for the GOP, this is obviously a gift. They're like, look at all those racist Democrats, as if they're not more racist. I mean, it's kind of ludicrous, but that's how they frame things. And then for folks that aren't aware, that have some sort of rose-colored glass viewpoint of the Democratic Party, they're kind of surprised to hear that.
Yeah. Well, and part of it too is how things are in Los Angeles. I mean, let's be real, because because our local offices are by definition like they're actually not partisan. I mean, a lot of these people. Look at Rick Caruso. He was.
Yeah, we've talked about that. I don't think it matters.
And then he's just like, I'm a Democrat now. I swear. Even like someone like Buscato. I mean, I don't know who he voted for, but I'd be surprised if it wasn't Trump. I mean, maybe he didn't. I don't know. But it's like
I'd be surprised if he didn't. I'd be surprised.
I mean, they're not remotely. I mean, not that the Democratic Party is a right-wing party, so I guess in a way they're right at home. But I mean, it's kind of just. It's just the real estate developers and everybody else. That's what local politics really is in Los Angeles. And you just need to get those endorsements from all the Democratic clubs. So even if you are like, GOP or whatever, you have to basically
you just switch parties and get their endorsement.
You switch parties to get their endorsement. So so it's that's why I don't understand how anybody in California could justify blue no matter who, because you see the Democratic Party is so dominant here that we literally have
the conservatives are Democrats. I mean,
we have actual GOP people joining the Democratic Party because they just have to,
to win an election.
Which it sucks that it's that way for any one party, but anyway. So
no, but it's true. It's true. So that's just unique to California in some ways. All right, let's move on to digital rights. So we missed you the last couple of weeks, and we haven't had any conversations about digital rights, and you have a few things you want to discuss. So let's do that.
There's some pretty big things going on. I mean, first of all, I'll give something that relates to the midterms. History has been made as far as the lack of appointing an FCC commissioner. This is historic levels. It's been nearly 2 years.
Yeah.
Gigi Sohn, a pro-net neutrality FCC appointment, a more than qualified FCC appointment. She's been doing this work for 30 years. She still has not been confirmed. And that's why the FCC is in gridlock, and we haven't seen any action on federal net neutrality because they won't appoint her. If she's not appointed by the end of the year, they have to re-up her appointment. They basically have to redo it again through a new Congress. It's not even guaranteed that's going to happen. I think this would likely be the first time in history there's ever been an FCC that doesn't even reflect the White House. And, let's be honest, I don't think Joe Biden cares that much. I mean, yes, he was forced to pick a pro-net neutrality FCC head. That was one of the concessions that the Bernie task force made him promise. They were like, you got to appoint a pro-net neutrality FCC appointee. And Biden said, okay. And he did do that. Gigi Sohn is a pro-net neutrality FCC appointee. But he doesn't really give a shit if she gets appointed or not. Why? Because he started his campaign with a bunch of Comcast executives. Yeah. That's why. So, I mean, this is historic. But I encourage everyone, you can go to battleforthenet.com because there's actually a piece of policy out there. Colin, if you can bring that up, I think it's the Verge article. If you got that handy, there's a piece of policy out there that would just give us net neutrality back, that we can
which we need. Yeah.
So you can go to battleforthenet.com. So this is a bill called the Net Neutrality and Broadband Justice Act. It was led by Ed Markey and Ron Wyden. Two people that, I don't agree with either one of them on everything, but they both have pretty good track records on digital rights issues. So this is a bill that they authored that would give us net neutrality back without having to wait on the FCC, basically, and give it back to us on a federal level. So the other thing that's pretty big here, the Supreme Court, which, they always knock it out of the park, but the Supreme Court is ruling on two cases that will really have a big impact on Section 230. Now, these two cases have to deal with, plotting violence on social media. So it's a heavy topic, and I don't dispute that. But the problem could become, if they were to rule against Section 230, this could really alter the internet for the worse as we know it. Now, what is Section 230? Section 230 is the part of the Communications Decency Act that just assures freedom of speech online. in recent times it's been referred to as a shield for social media companies, which is a very abbreviated explanation as to what it really is, because it's not a shield for.
I sort of think it goes both ways. I mean, we have seen some examples where they've used it to get out of liability.
That's true, but it applies to everyone. Saying that, like, oh, Section 230 should be abolished because it shields social media.
I don't think it should be abolished, but I do think there should be some changes. But sorry.
Well, they should add to it. I mean, because it's sort of like saying we shouldn't have free speech because it applies to, Nazis or something. It's like, well, no, we should have free speech. We should just have additional policies as to what that really means.
What that means, you clarify.
You can't defame somebody. You can't incite violence. We have laws around that. It's the same situation here. We shouldn't take away Section 230 because that applies to all users on the internet. It doesn't just apply to a social media company. It applies to you. It applies to me. It applies to a news article. It applies to an online classified. It applies to someone's personal website. It applies to all speech on the internet. So blowing a hole in it could really alter the internet as we know it, not for the better. The better solution would be to have additional policy that meets the moment and kind of deciphers how these social media companies need to behave. My personal take, they should have to follow the free speech laws of the United States. We already have free speech laws. They should have to follow. End of story.
No argument for me here.
So another place I want to point people, can you bring the DMs call to action up, Colin? MakeDMSsafe.com. Of course, that means DMs, but that's another website folks can go to because
direct messaging, right? On social media.
So, on social media, our messages on Facebook and Twitter are not encrypted. They are not safe. And on a weekly basis, Facebook turns over personal messages to law enforcement.
Yeah.
This has increased, especially in a post-Roe v. Wade world, because a lot of times it's people trying to get information about abortion. They were trying to get a law passed in South Carolina that basically outlaws people's ability to even access abortion-related websites. So it's getting pretty bleak, and Facebook is willing to, play the fiddle for the establishment. Please tell me again how everybody that runs Facebook is on the left. Please tell me that story again.
But hang on. I just don't understand why anybody would use Facebook or Instagram to communicate anything of that magnitude anyway. I mean, this has been the case with Facebook since day one.
How many regular people know that? How many?
I don't know. I guess I always think that everybody does. Like I use Signal for communication. So.
And does the average person even know what Signal is?
No, but we should maybe.
There you go.
Maybe spread the news.
Signal is good. To everyone listening right now, Signal, it's a good thing. So you can go to Make DM Safe, which the full URL, MakeDMSsafe.com, and sign that petition. Over 60 organizations have gotten on board. The Washington Post amplified it. Please sign this petition. This is demanding encrypted messaging all across social media so that your DMs are safe. We are in a time where it is being openly shared with law enforcement. You have no privacy. And if they were to blow a hole in Section 230, and all of a sudden these platforms are worried about lawsuits every which way, you're going to be even more vulnerable. So please, MakeDMSsafe.com, MakeDMSsafe.com, but full URL, MakeDMSsafe.com, and sign that petition.
I mean, Ron, honestly, at the end of the day, I think this is the inevitable outcome of the Patriot Act and the way we allowed that to carve into, Fourth Amendment rights. They don't have to get a subpoena necessarily now, or they go to a FISA court to get whatever. I mean, we knew this would eventually come to be the normalized thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's rough, but I mean, we got to push back because the technology is here.
I agree.
And it's not going anywhere, and it's just part of our ethers. So
it is now.
We gotta fight for it, and we gotta try to make it. We got to try to make it a valuable tool instead of a Orwellian surveillance hellscape. So,
right. All right. Should we talk about Tulsi Gabbard?
Sure. Yeah.
So Tulsi Gabbard has left the Democratic Party. I don't think anyone's going to be shocked by that announcement. What's really fascinating to me, though, Ron, is the arc of Tulsi Gabbard. There was a time when she was actually, believe it or not, in the Clinton camp before she was not, and then she was criticizing the DNC. there's a whole arc that's happened from that to where she's more or less, as far as I'm concerned, embracing the alt-right. When you make statements about globalists, about anti-white racism, all of these QAnon dog whistles, that's sort of where you are now. And now you're campaigning for a MAGA person. So there's definitely an arc there. I always think that, and she's not the only one, obviously, and I always think it stems from this idea that if you're just anti-establishment for the sake of being anti-establishment, you're not moored to any real political principles, it's easy to get adrift into this, well, this person, Bernie Sanders anti-established, Trump's anti-establishment, even though they might have markedly different belief systems that are at odds with each other, that's the only commonality, right? So what do you make of this?
So first of all, I at one point did like Tulsi Gabbard. I was fooled. I believed that she was sincere. I believed that her change socially was genuine. And I was wrong. I was completely wrong. I supported Bernie in 2020, but, early on, I was even wondering if she was going to be, kind of the front runner because, early on when we weren't sure what exactly Bernie was going to do, or if he did decide to run, would the momentum still be there? A lot of us, and I was one of them, was worried we were going to have a repeat of 2016. And we were kind of wondering, gee, maybe we need somebody who is really just going to be a firebrand, who is just going to be too loud to let that happen. Turns out that was a valid concern. However, the idea that Tulsi Gabbard was the answer, no. So, but there was a point in time where I really thought she was that person. And I have a lot of
fair. I interviewed her.
Yeah. Well, what did you think?
I interviewed her. I thought there was always some red flags there, but I was sort of willing to look the other way on a couple of them. I think the Modi problem was an obvious red flag. Obviously, Modi's he's a far right nationalist, so if you support that guy, questionable. She had some anti-gay rights stances early on. She did turn around and apologize for those and say that she had changed her tune and that she had been influenced by her father, who is very conservative. All right, she apologized, fair for that.
I believed her at one point.
Yeah, when I interviewed her, I had asked her, this was right after she had stepped down from the DNC to support Bernie Sanders, so the conversation I had with her had to do with the superdelegates, and she wasn't wrong on that. What she had to say about that was correct. Tom Perez could come in there at any moment, and he had a whole handful of superdelegate proxy votes that he could use to sway any sort of election outcome if he wanted to. So, and that's what was happening. So she wasn't wrong on any of that. I just think, we have to have a conversation at some point about this idea that I have about being anti-establishment or contrarian isn't a philosophy in and of itself. It's not a political belief in and of itself. And, because Tulsi's not the only person that we've seen, I'm going to use the parlance that they used. She's not the only person that's been red-pilled from Bernie Sanders to this side. She's but one
though? I don't give her... Here's my take on her.
Okay, so hang on, let me finish. There's the second option is this. Let me get to this. The second option is that. The second part of it, or I should say, is I also think there's an element of grifting involved, not to overuse the word grift, but I do think that a lot of these folks, also because they don't have their beliefs moored into any really solid political principles, they're willing to go where the views are, where the money is, where the audience is, and they take a moment to have a slight, sort of alt-right position, and they get more views, they get more attention, they get more money. Then they go to the next level of embracing a little bit more of that, because there is an audience for these things. Let's be honest. The only place you're going to see the alt-right viewpoint is either on, some YouTube channels, but the internet, Telegram, whatever. So I think they're sort of lured into that as well.
I think she is somebody who is just seeking the brand that is going to click the most for her. And I don't think there is a sincere bone in her body. Right. And I think that, it started, she was going to be a DNC darling, then that went south. So she's like, okay, where can I, this Bernie camp, this might kind of be. But then they never really kind of caught on to her, at least not en masse. So then she's like, oh, okay, well, how about this like anti-establishment libertarian thing? Okay, well, that wasn't quite big enough. Just being an anti-imperialist, that wasn't quite big enough. So now she's just kind of going full to the right. And, in a year or two, she'll probably be doing something else. I really do think that is the deal with her. She has, for 2+ years now, shown who she really is. I mean, and all these people who are convinced that she's really committed to anti-imperialism. First of all, she's had some pretty cringy imperialist takes as of recent. But second of all,
absolutely she has. I think she's a hypocrite. I don't think that her commitment to being anti-war, anti-interventionist is solid. There are plenty of examples where that's not the case.
Think about what she did. All right, so when she's leaving office, she can throw any Hail Mary that she wants. You're leaving office, you're leaving Congress. Supposedly, you're done with the establishment, so what are you going to tell them? What are you going to say on your way out the door? She could have supported Ro Khanna's Yemen bill. I got plenty of complaints about Ro Khanna, but his Yemen bill's not one of them. She could have come up with some other, like ending the war bill, like throw a Hail Mary. What did she do? Does anyone recall? I recall. She put forward a bill about trans people in bathrooms. She put forth a transphobic bill with a bunch of just buzzwords. I mean, if anti-imperialism is your main thing, even if you agree with her horrible transphobic views, please tell me, what war was started by a transgender person in a bathroom? Which war was that? I missed that one. So that was her big Hail Mary. That was her big, this is what I have to say. That was the hill that she went out on when she was leaving. Do you think there's any reason to take that person remotely serious after that? And if you do, I don't know what planet you're living on. And especially after her big spiel, I mean, leaving the Democratic Party, that's great. But then you listen to her reasons, and it sounded like something, out of a Fox News script. Or worse even. I would say it's like OAN pretty much. And right? That's
no, you're not wrong. I mean, and she's also supported the 300 million, military budget thing too. So I mean, there's plenty of hypocritical. We could spend another hour talking about that. I just thought that, this got a lot of attention the other day, obviously, because, it's clickbaity, but I don't think it's surprising at all that she left the Democratic Party. I think she's been headed in that direction for 2 years.
Big time. It's like, how do you? I mean, when someone says I'm leaving the Democratic Party, my first response is great, but then it's you listen to her reasons, you're like, oh,
you're like, what anti-white?
Although I didn't like
globalists. I mean, come on now.
When I saw it, I didn't really care because, again, when she showed who she really was, I just kind of thought, okay, I got duped by some. I mean, I was duped. I mean, you can find old videos of me saying how I think electorally she's going to be a leader. She's going to step up. I was freaking wrong.
She came to KDM and she gave some really solid, speeches that she did get to the heart of the matter of the not anti-war. I want to say anti-regime change kind of a stuff. So, and she was there with Bernie, with Cornel West. So I mean, there's reasons that happened. Was she sincere in that moment and she sort of drifted more this way? Who knows?
Who knows? I mean, I don't know if she is ever sincere about anything. It's tough to say. And by the way, that's not unique to Tulsi Gabbard. What I just described is like 99.9% of politicians. Like this isn't unique to her. It's just she's somebody who I personally at one point thought was different. I have a lot of friends and colleagues who were never fooled by her, and I appreciate them for never rubbing it in my face. I have a lot of friends who we had discussions, and I was like, I think you're wrong about Tulsi. They weren't. Yeah. I was, and they've never rubbed it in my face. So kudos to them.
So before we switch gears and go on to Right Wing Insanity Report, which is really good today. Today I'm doing I'm having a report basically on life after hate. What does that mean? Well, if you've been drawn into the neo-Nazi movement, can you leave that movement and go on to be a loving, wonderful human being? The answer to that is yes. I spoke with two ex-neo-Nazis that now work in the area of de-radicalizing people in the movement, helping them out. So it's an interesting conversation because you're going to hear about how you get sucked into the movement in the first place. How does one become a Nazi? You just don't fall into becoming a Nazi, right? What are the circumstances to that?
It doesn't happen accidentally.
It doesn't happen like that, right?
Just, whoa, what happened? That was... we just went to the
falling
bar.
In love. Yeah, I walked out and I became a skinhead. Yeah. So anyway, but it's interesting to hear those circumstances, and then also what makes you stop in your tracks and realize this is not the person I want to be. So a little bit more positive than our normal discussions on covering the right wing. So I think folks will enjoy that.
Really cool. I mean, that's really, really cool. I mean, I mean, American History X is a fictional movie.
Well,
but
no, it's actually not. One of the guys I spoke to is the character in that was based on him. His name is Frank Mink. That's correct.
That's awesome. But I mean, but the story itself, like those characters were not. But my reason for bringing it up is that powerful quote in there is when he's talking about trying to reform. I guess it was Ed Norton's character. And he goes, the teacher goes, this stuff is learned. It can be unlearned too. And then, of course, Ed Norton unlearns it when he's in jail. I don't want to spoil. Right. It's a great movie. You haven't seen it. I highly recommend it.
It is a great movie. He befriends a black guy in jail, and it makes him revisit all of those thoughts.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what's coming up next in the Right Wing Insanity Report. But before we move on to that, I wanted to take one last second here. I know we're running a little bit late, but Italy, you've spent 2 weeks there in Italy, almost said 2 months. You were there for the election. So I'm calling this a drift to the far right. Some people are trying to say this is girl boss, which I don't understand at all. What is your take on what happened in Italy?
So, I didn't get to see like a ton of stuff. But, I talked to some of my colleagues over there who are all communists. So I got I had a perspective from that point of view. And then I talked to some of my family as well. And I'll kind of give an overall, like kind of what I took in from it. Keep in mind, they had the lowest turnout they've had, I'm pretty sure, since World War II. So basically the last time they had this low of a turnout was when they got Mussolini. So
that's an interesting point.
They had incredibly low voter turnout. So really only about 16% of Italians voted for this person. So, generally on the street, nobody really liked her because 60%, that's 1.5 out of 10 people. So it's you don't have a very high chance at finding someone who voted for her. I never did, to tell you the truth. But,
do you have an opinion on why the turnout was so low?
I think it's a lot like what you see in the United States. People are very disenfranchised right now. Italy took a really big beating during the pandemic. Italy, especially with the conflict in Russia-Ukraine, they're worried about an upcoming energy crisis. They didn't really have good leadership anywhere across the board. They were being run by a banker who was just a blank suit and just a neoliberal banker, and they were just sick of it. So,
that makes sense.
They were pretty fed up. And, but here's the other thing, and I'm not trying to downplay her getting elected. It's of course terrible that she got elected. But the other thing people do need to keep in mind, because Italy has a more, they have a parliamentary, proportional representation system. A lot of the coalitions more on the left that are either just left parties themselves, or in this case, left friendly parties, they did get a fair percentage of the vote. The PD, which is basically their center left party and their biggest one, it's basically like they're Democrats, except, it's not a right wing party like the Democrats. It's actually a center party. So, the PD got a decent proportion of the vote. And then the Movimento 5 Stelle, which is the 5-star movement, which that's kind of an interesting thing. It's they're trying to do a post-partisan thing, and they're all over the place. But more recently, some leftists have, kind of gotten into them a little bit. They've had some problematic stances on things like immigration in the past, but supposedly they're shedding that, and they're trying to kind of find their identity, I guess. But right now they're kind of more aligned with the left parties. They had a decent turnout. So, she won, which is terrible. And by the way, she is a fascist. I know there were some
She is a fascist, yeah.
There were some edgelords on Twitter who were trying to be like, well, technically she's not. No. She's a freaking fascist. She was part of some Mussolini thing as a kid. She never denounced any of it. She's part of a party that doesn't fully denounce fascism. She has horrible views. She's homophobic. She's transphobic. She's xenophobic to the core. And by the way,
she's very anti-immigrant. I mean, come on now.
Very much so. And she's the whole she's the anti-establishment, this, that. No, she's not. She's an imperialist. One of the first things she did was
she's anti-Semitic.
Yeah, she's anti-Semitic. She gave Zelensky a tongue bath. One of the first things she did. And she's all about the U.S. line on funding the wars until end time. So she's not, she's against the establishment. No, she isn't. She is the frickin' establishment. And she's not going to buck the EU on the imperialist side because she's on board with it. And on the good side, the EU is going to give Italy a fair amount of relief money. Some of it's going to be used for high-speed broadband all over the country, which, as a municipal broadband advocate, of course, I'm for that. She's not going to mess with that, as she shouldn't, because it'd be political suicide. So she's not some anti-establishment person in any way whatsoever. She is the establishment, and she's a fascist. If you were confused on that, I just fixed it for you. But these other parties did have a decent showing. And I will say this, too. Verdi Sinistra, which means green left, they got 3%. And so when you kind of put it in perspective, you kind of think, and I know their system's different, but I kind of was like, gee, if the U.S. had a midterm and the Green Party or the PSL won 3%.
Right, 3%, that'd be great.
I'd be I'd be in the streets. Are you kidding me? I'd be celebrating. I'd be like, holy shit, 3%. So I'm not trying to downplay her getting elected, but there's going to be a lot of opposition because a lot of these left coalition parties, they had large showings too.
So they got a lot of seats in the parliament, so that'll be a balance.
So she can't just do whatever she wants. There's going to be some checks and balances because the next right-wing party was 2 or 3 steps down. After
wow, that is a big difference. Okay.
Yeah, it was he was with, I believe, Fratelli d'Italia, and then Forza, I think it's Forza Italia is the next right party, and they were way lower. So yeah, I mean, it's not quite as simple as they have a fascist dictator now. Fortunately, it's not that simple. But
no, there's still a parliament, folks. There's still a parliament, thank goodness. So she can't railroad everybody over. But I do think it's indication of globally where we are heading, because fascism isn't just increasing in the United States, it's increasing everywhere, right? And a part and parcel to that is, you kind of touched on this a little bit, is it has to do with income inequality. It has to do with the fact, you have a bankster candidate that came before. That sort of enables the right wing to come in with a populist economic message, especially if the left isn't providing some sort of left exit to the economic problems, which is generally what we're seeing out there. And I think that you're right. She's definitely not anti-establishment, but neither was Donald Trump, right? He was viewed as an anti-establishment candidate, but he's the establishment. He's part of the wealthy elites that he says he's going to do something about. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, just superficially.
It's a similar thing. I mean, it's a very similar thing where it's just we're against this establishment that's screwing you over. But what we really mean by that is we don't have any answers. We're just going to blame the immigrant for all of your problems.
Right.
I mean, it really is Trump's, it's a Trump playbook thing.
It's a Trump playbook.
Rather, Trump borrowed it from other people, I mean, Trump, I mean, that playbook's been around a long time. So
it's been around a long time. And I also think Marine Le Pen would be a good, something else to look at. She didn't win, but she came quite close. And it is feasible, now that you mentioned the low turnout as being part and parcel to why she won. That could have been something that happened in France, too. Generally speaking, when there's a low turnout, the far right does do better. It's strange, but you see that even in the United States.
All the time in the United States. I mean, that's why, I mean, we always have low voter turnout. So we always elect right-wingers, even if they have D's next to their and but I'll say this, too, just as another kind of observational thing. One of my family members is conservative, and I mean, he only speaks so much English and I only speak so much Italian, so our conversations have only been so advanced,
Right.
But it really is interesting, the difference in what that means in other places. Like, he is a conservative, but he doesn't want anyone to not have health care. He thinks everyone should be able to go to college. He has no problem with gay people or anybody else. He thinks everyone who works an honest job should be able to live. He, you know, like, he doesn't... He just
same thing in Sweden. My Swedish family, some of them would be conservative, and they think like they would never give up their universal health care. They think that's absolutely madness. So yeah,
he just thinks that like financial people should be running the country because they know finance and that's good for the country. I don't agree with the guy, you know, like I disagree with him, but you know, it's not quite the bite on what it means to be conservative.
All right.
It's just not as extreme there as it is here.
Do we have any super chats that we need to get to? How is this? We don't have any super chats? What? Oh, well, we didn't ask for any, to be fair.
Well, people, not too late. It's not too late, folks.
Late.
And smash that like button. And if you can't sign up over at Status Coup. Join. Put up the join link. There we go. StatusCoup.com/join. Journalism, look, firsthand journalism, it takes money to do that. It's not, I mean, you know, there's all kinds of costs involved, especially when cops are breaking your windows. That happens to Tina sometimes. So please, if you are able, help support on the ground journalism. That's where your membership money goes.
I mean, it's not only cops, it's right wingers, it's all kinds of crazy out there. Everybody's wilding. Save Tina's car.
StatusCoup.com/joy. Who knows what's going to happen to it next?
Who knows? All right, so now we are going to turn this over to Right Wing Insanity Report. Yay!
Can I plug my tour dates real quick first?
You can plug your tour dates. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Like, I know we're going a little over, but folks, I do.
We're going a lot over.
Placone.com. I just announced Tucson, Arizona. That's January 28th. You can get tickets now on my website. If you use the promo code Lucy at checkout, there's a limited time discount. So get them now because you can get discounted tickets now. That's going to be a stand-up show, and I'm going to be screening my short movie, my short film Loner. So that's a film screening and a stand-up show. So ronplacone.com for tickets for that. So
right on.
Thank you all.
All right, so let's switch gears to Right Wing Insanity Report. So again, today we are looking at life after hate. I spoke with a couple of ex-neo-Nazis who are now working in the area of pulling people out. Chuck Leek, who's the second one I talked to, he's what he calls an exit specialist. So when somebody's ready to leave the movement, they provide support and assistance with doing that. Every way from emotional support to housing support to having, obviously racist tattoos removed because that's quite common. So the whole 9 yards. So I wanted to look at this because I think it's another part to the conversation. I think people can be redeemable, and it's important that we understand what that looks like and also what motivates people to join these movements to begin with. And we did just get Humorous. Thank you, Humorous.
Thank you, Humorous.
With your super chat. Y'all put on an awesome show tonight. Thank you so much for the information and the entertainment at the same time. I am much more entertaining when Ron is with me. Otherwise, I can be a little too serious, I know, but Ron brings out that side of me, so I'm glad you're back, Ron. Glad to have you here today.
Thank you.
I always enjoy that. All right, so signing off on today's live stream on the news today and switching gears over to Right Wing Insanity. Please stick with us and learn a little bit about this. Tina-Desiree Berg reporting for Status Coup News. This week on Right Wing Insanity Report, we're going to take a look at life after hate. Is there life after being in a neo-Nazi movement? Can you leave the movement safely, and can you go on to have a life outside of those worlds? And the answer is yes. And in order to find out how that works, we decided to talk to a few ex-neo-Nazis that have now gone on to start nonprofits. A lot of them work in areas of rehabilitating or de-radicalizing is a better word probably, folks that have been in the movement, because it's not always easy to get out of these movements. And it's not always safe. So first I wanted to talk with Frank Mink. We caught up with Frank Mink at a BLM protest. Frank is rumored to be the guy behind the movie American History X. So he is a guy that was part of the skinheads, got into the movement young, around 13 years old. By the time he was 18, he had a public access TV show called Reich, which was obviously about skinhead movements and neo-Nazism. And he traveled the country recruiting other white supremacists into the movement. What changed was he ended up doing a stint in prison, and he became friends with a black guy while he was in there, and it kind of caused him to unravel all of his belief system. And now he works on the opposite side. So he was at a BLM protest, and we decided to talk to him. This interview is being conducted by my associate, Sean Beckner-Carmichael. So let's hear what Frank has to say.
My name is Frank Mink, but Mink spelled very weird. Mink is M-E-E-I-N-K. You can find me on Instagram or Twitter. So, who I am? So I'm a former neo-Nazi. I was a neo-Nazi from 1988 to 1994. I got out. They made a loosely based movie and wrote a couple books about me. I've been studying race since that time. When I was in the neo-Nazis, I studied race, and then when I got out, I studied for the last 25 years on how empathy is the key to ending racism in an individual. I also do interventions on people in hate groups. So I've been doing that for the last 20 years, getting guys out of the hate groups.
So what does that intervention look like? I'm sure it's a very emotional, very stressful experience. Could you kind of walk through, I'm sure you'll have to glaze over the process a little bit, but just kind of go into a little bit what those look like, what the process is?
A lot of the times an intervention on a guy is more or less us trying to point out where in his life where his life is falling short now because of his beliefs, right? Because we can't just, if we just went and just argued beliefs, you can go all day. But if we just talk about how, like, where's your life at right now? You know, you thought you were going to be the next Hitler, and you're on probation, and your probation officer has me coming and talking to you. Like, where's your life at, right? So, and then just getting to show them people that they hate. And I've always been able to find the right people to bring around. Say I find a neo-Nazi who's just had a nasty breakup with a girlfriend. I'll make sure I find a black guy that's going to help me with him that went through or can talk about that. And it's boom, it's instant, man. It's instant. And there's one of them on YouTube, actually, if you look it up. Frank Mink, M-E-E-I-N-K TV show, and you'll see my old TV show that I used to do interventions on.
Awesome.
So, but I want to talk about the thing that I know that is truth here, is that the police have used their lobbyists and their union to move from civil servants. See, there's civilians, which are us, the people, and then there's our elected officials above us who we put there, and then there's civil servants who are supposed to be beneath us. That's the way democracy works. Well, over the last couple of years with lobbyists and their unions, the police have moved above us in between, and they broke democracy. This is true. How did they do it? With the war on drugs, kicking in black people's doors, pulling them out of cars to search them all the time. You know, they used that law and they broke this system. There's 2.4 million people in prison because of the way they broke it. And because they search our cars and pull us out and bring them fake stuff, drug. Breonna Taylor, everyone keeps saying, let's talk about the no-knock warrants. No, it's a no-knock drug warrant that got her killed. A no-knock drug warrant. So if we eliminated drug warrants, what would that look like? It would be beautiful. That means cops cannot pull us out of the cars no more. They can't say, we want to search your car for drugs. They can't bring the dogs around us. They have to just give you a ticket and let you go. And we're also going to save officers' life, because now guys are not going to be all freaked out about going back to on parole, shooting it out with the cops because they have a half ounce of coke in their car. It saves officers' life because we know you're just going to give us a ticket. Stay out of our lives. Stop breaking the Fourth Amendment. Police are only trained on not how to respect our Fourth Amendment. They're only trained on how to trick us out of getting things from our Fourth Amendment. And that's what we need to stop right now. That would be the one thing they can surrender, to say, okay, now we can talk and have peace.
Awesome. I know I have to ask because people will want to know. Could you talk a little bit about your relationship with the film and the book, American History X?
Yeah, so American History X, you know, no one will ever fess up that if anyone wrote it about me, except for the director did. He kind of one time had mentioned me. So they did their own thing. That's why there's a lot of stuff that's different about really what happened and who I am. They don't have the same name. It's Derek Vineyard, but my name is really Frank Mink. And if you Google it or look, IMDb me even, it's a trivia question on IMDb. So the book was a different process. The book, I went with book writers and fact finders, and we went to every location in my life that something happened. And we, like Illinois, I was in Illinois for a while, I was in the Department of Corrections in Illinois. all these different crazy places. And I wrote my book called Autobiography of Recovering Skinhead.
Thank you. One big question for me, particularly because you work with white supremacists, this might be a little bit of a loaded question, but do you find, as someone who is still sort of working inside that, within that community, I guess is the best way to put it, do you find that you are working with people with police connections? Do you find that there, in your opinion, is there a police connection to white supremacist groups in large enough numbers to warrant discussing?
Not on the work that I do now do I know the officers, but from when I was a neo-Nazi, I know guys that were neo-Nazis with me that have become cops. And some of them have been found out and some got kicked off forces. I think they just moved to another force, which is bad. This is one of our problems we have, where cops go from force to force to force. Some have lost their jobs, and but there are still ones that are absolutely and are still totally involved that are neo-Nazis, that are police officers, that are long-standing police officers now. In doing the work I do now with the neo-Nazis, the one thing I have to be clear with is that I don't want nobody to go to prison, even neo-Nazis. Like, I'd rather help them than go to prison. So I've never been a guy I've never helped law enforcement to put anyone in prison, but I did for years help law enforcement on all of their hate crimes training. And I became accustomed to, and that's how I started to learn about the Fourth Amendment trick. They never talk about how important it is to us. They just talk about how it's important to trick us into letting us search our cars. And it's always, once a police officer is searching your car, he's not trying to help you, he's trying to build the case. Instant he pulls you out of that car, that man is looking to get you in the back of his squad car, get you in the county jail, and get you booked. That's why he's searching your car. And that's what we need to stop right now. We need it all to stop, because it's mostly portrayed on black people. And here's you know who they're not kicking in the door? The family that started the Oxycontin epidemic, that family in the Purdue company, we ain't kicking in their doors. We ain't going to our houses with drug-sniffing dogs and shit. No, we only do it to mostly poor and minorities. It's the way the police got above us in the system, and they broke it. We have private prisons in this country now. We are in fucking trouble. But the American people can fix this.
So, how do you think we can fight white supremacy? Perhaps if someone's an ally and either knows someone who is an avowed white supremacist, or maybe even someone who shares a lot of those beliefs but perhaps might not be aware of it.
On the neo-Nazis and the racist guys that, I've done an intervention on a guy one time. His daughter was marrying a black man, and he was just an old school, as he thought, old school racist, right? And so, and I happily did an intervention on him, and it absolutely worked. He went to his daughter's wedding. He was part of his daughter's wedding. He refused to go until we had this meeting, and it was pretty tremendous. But the reason I want to bring him up is because I don't worry about him. We shouldn't worry about him. That's not the racism that we're trying to fight here. That's just ignorance. The racism that we're trying to fight is the private prison industry, and the lockup rate of people for non-violent drug offenses, just to give a dude a case. See, because once they get a person locked into the system, now he's on probation. If he can't pay off his probation, then he has a better chance of getting violated, and then he can go upstate. And it all starts with these little drug convictions. And so I don't worry about the guy saying the N-word. He's just ignorant, and hopefully God will affect him like he did me. I don't worry about him that much anymore as I worry about the systematic of racism.
Got it. I guess one big question I have, take me through your personal journey and what the catalyst was to turn from a white supremacist in the 80s to someone at a Black Lives Matter protest in 2020. That's quite a sea change. Can you take me through the catalyst of that?
I'll tell you, just up to this right now is one of the proudest proudest times I've ever been on a prison bus was being arrested here. And I've been on a couple of them in my life, but I never was so proud of all the people I was with. It was just amazing. So to say that, I grew up actually around mostly black people. I grew up in like West Philly, Southwest Philadelphia. I went to an all-black school. I fist fought a lot. That's what kind of got me into the skinheads. But when I got into prison, and I got so high up into the neo-Nazis, and anyone can just research me. I'm not talking about ego. I'm ashamed of what I've done in that movement. But I got really popular, really big in it for a long time. And when I was in prison, I started playing football with a lot of black dudes. I was in the Chicago prison system. I was a young 17-year-old kid in a maximum security adult prison. I was in the same prison with John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer. Like, I'm in that same prison. But anyway, I got to play football with a lot of these kids. And man, when you play football and play sports with a bunch of kids, man, you just start to change. Like we talk, this is 1992, 93, 94. Man, I would, like, black kids that I would get done playing basketball with, like, we'd always talk about girls and what's going on in life. And I couldn't talk to the older Aryans, my older gang, about that stuff, because I was a young buck, but I was also a very highly protected person because of who I was on the outside. But I just noticed that more days out of any other times, I always wanted to be around like G or Jello or Tony, the guys that like made me laugh. Like they would just make me laugh all the time. And, so when I was getting out of prison, I kind of had this little bit of this feeling that I was kind of cool in the black and the Asian and the Latino. Like I can get that we're all equal, but I'm still a neo-Nazi and I still want to be a neo-Nazi at the time. I'm getting out of prison, I'm 19 years old. That's all the clout I have in the world is this neo-Nazi world. So I continued just to hate the Jews. That was my one last thing I could hold on to. And then I had a big swastika on my neck at the time. So if you ever see an old picture, I used to have a big swastika tattoo right here. I got it laser surgered off, and you can still see little dots of it and stuff. But I had my skinhead on my knuckles lasered off. Anyhow, I couldn't get a job worth nothing, man. This is not good people skills. You know what I mean? We get a swastika and having tattoos all on my head, aggravated kidnapping. And a Jewish man gave me a job at an antique show, carrying out antique furniture. And this man just was a decent man. He was very Jewish. And my buddy told me before I got the job, he goes, "You're the guy that owns the company, he's a Jew." He only needed me for 3 days. So I said, "I don't care. I don't got to talk to him, do I? Can I just work for him?" And he's like, "Yep." I told Keith about you. He said, I told him, "Yo, I know some neo-Nazi needs a job. Keith is a Jewish man." He goes, "I don't give a rat's ass what he believes. Just don't break my furniture." And I showed up and I worked for this man. And then after that, he gave me a full-time job because he liked the way I worked. And I used to drive around with this man all the time, go pick up furniture all around Philly and New York. And he would teach me about antiques and about business and about life. And we'd drive in trucks, and I would read the O.J. Simpson trial was going on at the time, and I would read it to him. And as we were driving, we'd talk about life. And being a neo-Nazi, I'm an egomaniac with no self-esteem. So when I break shit, I always go, "Oh, I'm so stupid." Well, I used to do that all the time. And one time I broke something in front of this Jewish man at a marble top table, which I shouldn't have broke. Stupidity on my part. And so I told Keith, "I'm so stupid. I'm so sorry that I broke that." And Keith came over to me, this Jewish man, Keith Brookstein, grabbed me by the back of my neck and pulled me closer and said, "Stop saying you're stupid, you fucking idiot. Clean it up and let's go." And he unloaded on me in the drive home that day. He unloaded me. He's like, "I hate when you say you're stupid." He's like, "You're one of the smartest people I've ever met." He goes, "Frank, smart people can fake being dumb, but dumb people can't fake being smart. You're just smart, Frank."
That's amazing.
And as I was walking away that day, it was the final day where I was like, this is it. Like, God has proven me wrong. Like, human nature, science, and God. Because as a neo-Nazi, when I was just getting out of all this, I would drive down the streets of Philly, and I see a guy, a black dude, selling food stamps on the street corner, 50 cents on the dollar. That's how they sell. 50 cents on the dollar. It means he's standing selling food stamps. And I would say, and I'd be out of the movement, but I would say, well, maybe the movement was right. And I go, wait a minute, my mom does that. My mom's been selling her food stamps my whole life, but she just doesn't do it on the street corner. So I'm going to judge this man over the same actions my mom does. Or an Asian person would cut me off and driving, Asian driver. And I was, wait a minute, my aunt hit a cow. Like, how do you hit a fucking cow, man? Like, they don't have deer, they don't jump in front of your fucking car. Like, the cow was already there and she hit it. So maybe everyone are bad drivers. Like, and I had to start breaking that down. And that was 27 years ago. Now it's, my life is beautiful. And I have children that are not white. And I've been amazing relationships. And I have men in my life who are not of my color, who are mentors to me that guide my life. And men who are not white who guide my life and how I should be a good human being.
That's awesome. So you talked quite a bit about systemic racism. We talked quite a bit about the Fourth Amendment and how that ties into the war on drugs and the racial issues that are involved with the war on drugs. What do you think America needs to hear the most right now?
Right now we need all drug warrants stopped. That's the police, with them being the police being above us now and breaking the system of democracy. Again, it's a true story. There's 2.4 million people in prison. They broke the chain of democracy. Once we can get them back down, and what America needs to remember is white people, and I'm sorry to say this to my white friend, for a long time we got into the life raft of America, and we pulled the fucking ladders out of the water for everybody else to get in. And it's time for we the people to put the fucking life rafts back in, get the police off their fucking pedestal because they're civil servants. They should be paddling the boat for us, really. That's their job. And we need to put the ladders back in the water, keep everybody in this fucking life raft, and then know where we sail off to? Enlightenment. Straight enlightenment. That's our next frontier as a human race. It's enlightenment. And it starts by treating everyone equal and get us all in that life raft.
Now we're going to talk with Chuck Leek. Chuck Leek is an ex-Hammerskin. He was recruited into the neo-Nazi movement by Tom Metzger, who was a guy that ran a movement outside of California, was based in California, crept out to the rest of the country. It was the war or white Aryan resistance in the 80s. He was also a member of the military. He was a Navy airman, and he was able to do some recruitment from other military guys in the system, but also outside of the system. He now is what he refers to as an exit specialist. He worked with a group called Life After Hate. He works with a different group now, but basically he is able to help guys that want to leave this movement. So they reach out to the organization. He gives them support and various other things. So let's bring Chuck in and talk to Chuck about how he got involved in the movement, because I think it's important to understand how folks are susceptible to this type of belief system to begin with, what it's like once you're in there and how you get out. So welcome, Chuck. So Chuck spent the early part of his life with the Hammerskins, which is a skinhead neo-Nazi movement. He was also in the Navy, so he did recruitment, I know, in the military to bring other people into the white supremacist movement. So right off the bat, Chuck, I wanted to ask you, how does one fall into this to begin with? I don't think people just wake up one day and decide to be neo-Nazis. There's something that happens, right? So can you walk us through a little bit of how that happens, who's susceptible, and the things that pull you in further?
Sure. There are there are multiple vectors that people fall into, but a common theme that you hear has to do with childhood trauma. I mean, it's not always the case, but it is frequently. It was in my case. I had some stuff happen to me when I was 10 that I just never really dealt with properly. My parents didn't deal with it, and then by the time I was in my early mid-teens, it just was this kind of self-hatred and rage that I felt, then didn't understand, didn't know why. And because of the atmosphere when I was growing up in the 70s in LA was very very accepting of white supremacist stuff, like SS and bolts and swastikas and SWP on people's peachy folders at school were, dating myself, they're peachy folders.
Yeah, I had them. I had peachy folders.
Yeah, they were a common thing back then, and like you saw it all over the place. And so it just kind of was a desensitizing thing. And then, like I said, when I started getting into my middle and later teens, I was just really super angry at the world, and then joined the military, started running with skinheads in the military, met some civilian skinheads that were, more overtly neo-Nazi than we were, and then ended up doing this news series on the local station in the area we lived. And Tom Metzger was involved with that. And from that, he became aware of us and recruited us. And we formed a chapter of the White Aryan Resistance Skinheads. And I was in that for a couple of years, did some time in prison, was out of state for a while doing various, white supremacist stuff, not skinhead stuff necessarily. And then came back to California and got involved with the Hammerskins. And so I was in Hammerskins for 5 or 6 years before I finally dropped out.
And so by the time you were in the Hammerskins, you had left the military, or were you still part of the military?
I had left the military. I was in the military when I was the Warskins, but then I got convicted of a felony, a civilian felony, released from the military, went to prison, and then after I got out of prison that's when I left the state for a while, and then came back and then joined the Hammerskins. So.
Okay, so let's talk about the military for a second, because when you initially became indoctrinated into white supremacist thought, it sounds like you were in the military. Was the military part and parcel to that?
Well, I had been exposed to a lot of white supremacist symbology and language prior to joining the military. like I was saying, growing up in LA, a lot of, I hung around with a lot of like biker kids, sons and younger brothers and stuff of biker gang guys. And so there was a lot of, the lingo but it wasn't ideological, So then when I joined the military and met these guys that were more ideological, that's where, joining an organized group and getting involved with Metzger and all that stuff did happen in the military, but the military wasn't like, I mean, other than the fact that that's how I ended up where I was, I didn't get radicalized, quote unquote, in the military, although it did play a pretty significant role as to like being in the place that I was. So.
Interesting. Now, so for folks that don't know who Tom Metzger is, let's talk about him for a second. Is he originally from California?
No, he's originally from like Indiana, but he was based out of Fallbrook, California, which is in, San Diego County for decades. Like most of his career where he was well known, like back in the 80s, he was doing, like Oprah Winfrey and Geraldo Rivera.
Skinheads are angry. One expressing that anger on cable access channels with white supremacist Tom Metzger.
We're ready to fight on the streets. We'll fight anywhere, wherever it takes. They're angry young people, and they're all over Europe. They're all over the United States.
The show that Geraldo got his nose broken on was Tom Metzger was on that show, was one of Tom Metzger's bodyguard guys that threw the chair. A bunch of guys that I knew from back then were on the show. Anyway. So yeah, he was a really high profile white supremacist leader from the late 70s until, he kind of lost a little bit of his profile after losing the civil rights suit for the Mulligeta-Serra case in Portland. It broke him financially, but it didn't stop what he was doing. And in fact, he talked about how that set him free actually to do what he really wanted to do, which was, create leaderless resistance networks, such as we're seeing today with like Adam Waffen and the base and stuff like that, who all, trace their roots back to Tom and in fact sought him out when they were forming their groups.
Wait, let's talk about that for a second. I didn't realize that. So I didn't realize Tom Metzger had such a influence on these modern, and that's what they are. They're more like smaller cells. So these are not necessarily national groups with top-down organizations. They're smaller groups, and we're seeing that also with, I think, the activist movement with these sort of MMA fight club kind of groups. So now that stemmed from something Metzger wanted?
Well, most of the high profile guys back then in the 80s, but Tom in particular, were talking about, blending in, don't get all tattooed up, don't dress like a skinhead. If you don't have felonies, join the military, join police forces. So there was a big push towards infiltration and also decentralizing and separating people from each other so that, there's no central group that can all get taken down at one shot. Yeah.
Right. So it's easier to evade law enforcement that way. And it's also, if you're able to actually become part and parcel to law enforcement, you're going to have more influence on spreading the ideology. So that makes sense. Right. You mentioned a lawsuit that came out of Oregon. I want to talk about that for a second for folks that don't know. I believe that might be the lawsuit that stemmed from the Southern Poverty Law Center for a hate crime that he was involved in. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, he wasn't involved. There were a group of skinheads that were, a couple of them were his guys, and they were recruiting up in the Portland area. And while they were up there recruiting, some of the guys that were Tom's guys and some of the guys that were local guys attacked and ended up killing an Ethiopian, I believe he was Ethiopian immigrant, Mulligeta-Serra. And a couple of them went to prison for a long time for that. But then the SPLC and I think there were a couple other groups involved. They sued Metzger in a civil trial, which he lost, and had a $12 million judgment against him.
Wow. That's wild. Okay, so that kind of killed that whole thing. That's a big judgment. Let me ask you this. What are some of the common methods that they use to recruit folks when they go out and recruit? Do they look for specific types of individuals that they think might be open to the messaging? How do they pick those folks out? What kinds of things do they say?
Well, back then, it was really more about like putting out papers and stickers and things like that and making your presence known. And then people would call and then we would meet them. It's kind of similar to that now, except that most of it is done online via
Telegram,
Telegram or Discord or
right.
whatever platform it may be. It's kind of the same idea. It's just it's not in a physical space. Although that stuff is still going on. I mean, like Patriot Front is doing, stickering all over the place, and so I mean, it is still happening.
No, it's definitely still happening. So these are folks that are just automatically sort of predisposed already to thinking this way. And then they see something that says, oh, there's other people that think like I do. I'm going to contact them, kind of a thing.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the initial radicalization process does kind of happen more frequently, at least in my experience, in sort of an isolated space. And then finding people who think more alike, and then it kind of snowballs from there. That's kind of my experience of it anyway.
No, that sounds, from looking on the outside in, that sounds about right from what I can tell. So, but here's my thing, Chuck. Sometimes there are people that they harbor racist thoughts, racist ideology, but they don't actually do violent acts based on it. Then you have others that get to the point where they actively seek out doing a violent act. What's the trigger for that, in your opinion?
I don't think you can really pin that down to one thing, And typically, the people that are going to take the step to commit violence are, broken people. Generally speaking, there's been some kind of significant, traumatizing factor of one sort or another that that's a pretty common theme, but you can't make a blanket statement that says that everybody who's going to commit violence has trauma. It's just because that's not a true statement, so.
But it does seem to be a common factor, and I also think what a common factor is, it sounds like to me, is that folks that are maybe come from places where they didn't have a loving family, or where they didn't feel like they belonged, and they're looking for having a group to belong to, maybe some of the same things that you would see with folks that sort of join a cult in a way.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's something that you hear commonly in the research behind the push and pull factors of getting into or getting out of white supremacist groups it's kind of broad against across anything that sort of resorts to violence, but you hear a lot of stuff about looking for a place to belong, looking for purpose, looking for friendship and brotherhood, or whatever you want to call it. You do hear that frequently when people are talking about why.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let me ask you this: what makes you decide all of a sudden to leave this? If you've been involved with, skinheads or with the neo-Nazi movement for many years, something must happen that makes you go like, what am I doing? Why am I here? I don't want to live this life anymore. What was your trigger?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that that's an all of a sudden, and I don't think it's an all of a sudden in most cases. I mean, I was thinking for years before I got out that I should get out, I mean,
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just, I thought for a long time that, this is stupid. These people are stupid. The things they believe are stupid. But you're just kind of like, it's what now, it's your social circle. It's I was married and my wife had been involved. It's just everybody I knew, just about everybody is involved in this stuff. And so, and I hear this a lot with people I work with that, they've been thinking for a while that, wow, this is just dumb, I mean, or other versions of that, and then, so I got to a point where, a bunch of stuff happened, a guy that I had been involved in a felony case with years before, me and him were involved in the thing now, but I wasn't caught. I would just happen to be there, and then he tried to drag me into it, and then like, so then a divorce, and so that's, and all this was going on while I was with the Hammerskins, and I just walked away from the Hammerskins because of all that stuff, and started hanging out with guys that were just like Nazi lowrider skinheads. They weren't really ideological. They weren't really involved with the movement. They were still, like white power skinhead dudes. They just weren't, the Hammerskins.
They just weren't out there committing hate crimes or whatnot.
I mean, they were, but not in the name of any, organized ideology. It was just more, like, drug crime and crap like that.
Right. So for folks that don't know, let's explain that for a second. I know who the Nazi lowriders are. I think they originally started in the San Fernando Valley in Palmdale. Actually, could be. You can correct me on that. But they are part of the Peckerwood group, the Aryan Brotherhood group. That's how I would see them. Is that more or less correct?
More or less. I mean, Aryan Brotherhood is kind of a prison gang that's mostly in prison.
Okay.
The Nazi lowriders are a prison gang that's kind of more outside of prison, and like they're and it's NLR was like specifically the gang you're talking about, but then it became kind of like a blanket term for all of those types of groups that so like the Kenai in Orange County and the actual NLR, those kinds of guys are just kind of referred to at least when I'm talking with people about it as Nazi lowrider types. So they're still violent. They're more drug oriented, more crime oriented. Don't really associate with the actual movement. Although there is crossover. Anyway, they don't tend to be organized. And so I started hanging out with...
I tend to think of them as like, honestly, this is how I think of like the Peckerwoods and whatnot. I tend to think of them as organized gangs that deal drugs and run guns and whatnot, and just happen to have a Nazi ideology on the side.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so, I started hanging out with those guys for a little while, and then stepped away from that too, and just completely. So all that took place over like 2.5 years. And the thing that really was the pivot is I was dating a girl for about a year, and we were having a conversation one night, and she dropped in the middle of the conversation that she was half Jewish. And I, it was kind of a stunner. I mean, yeah. I mean, she knew what I was. I mean, I met her through friends. She knew all my friends, and so she knew what was up. And she told me this, and I sat there for a minute, like, kind of with my, ears ringing a little bit, and then realized, as I was sitting there, that I cared more about her than I did about all the crap I'd been spewing for, 15 years before that, or more than that, really. And so that was kind of the turning point, but it wasn't. Like, it took me another 10 years after that to really like work through all of my stuff and change my belief system, and then right about that same time, this is now like about 2011, I got connected with Frank Mink, and who I believe you also interviewed for this.
Yes.
And
right.
Frank and I were in touch. I read his book, got in touch with him. At about that same time, him and a few other people were co-founding Life After Hate, and so I got involved as just like a volunteer. I had never been really an employee of Life After Hate, but I had been doing volunteer stuff for them, and media appearances and talking to classes, and for a while I was writing prisoners in that were people that were locked up, pen pal kind of thing. And I did that for, quite a few years, from 2011 until this year, actually, on and off. I took some breaks in there for a while, and then in April of this year, I started talking to the director of the Exit USA program that Life funds about coming on as we call it an exit specialist. That's my official title, but what it really is a peer mentor. Somebody that works with people who are trying to get out to help them navigate, going through the stuff that they're going to go through.
Right. So, which is, it has to be a process, I would imagine. Let me ask you this. Is it dangerous for these folks to leave these movements? Because I know that some of these folks really probably don't want you out in the world not believing what they believe anymore, that might seem threatening to them. Is it dangerous?
I mean, absolutely, it can be, yes. People have been, killed, maimed. It probably doesn't happen as much as people think it does, but it does happen, and it is dangerous, yes.
I would imagine so. So now part of your program is peer mentoring, and I think that makes sense because obviously somebody like myself or somebody that hasn't been through the experiences that you've been through, it would be very difficult for me to relate to everything this person was going through because I haven't been through it. I think it's a certain set of circumstances, and you kind of bond with each other over those shared experiences. So what are some of the methods that you use to reach out to these folks once they've come to you saying, this is not the life I want anymore?
Yeah, so life after hate has gone through some pretty significant changes in the last couple of years. We are, the Exit USA program got a new director, and she's done amazing things with the program. She's a psychologist. She's brought on social workers, and so we call it a multidisciplinary tertiary intervention program. Primary intervention is like stuff that goes to everybody at school or whatever, and secondary is slightly more targeted. Tertiary is dealing with people who have already been involved, and so that's our role as tertiary intervention. And yeah, having peer mentors is integral to the process as long as they're working with people who also know other professional aspects of what we're doing, such as social workers and psychologists, which we are not. And some people try to be, and they can do more harm than good when they're doing that. But we can develop rapport with people. So like the first kind of couple of things we're looking for, particularly if someone is actively engaged, is a disengagement, and then a commitment to nonviolence. Those are the primary things, and we work towards those things by developing a relationship, a rapport with the person, and peer mentors play a pretty critical role in that. Like you're saying, we can relate to where they've been and what they're going through and what's ahead of them, and can kind of help get them through that stuff. And so then hopefully after disengagement and commitment to nonviolence, we can continue working with them and work towards, we don't really like this term, but de-radicalization, so we want to get them to change their ideology ultimately. That's not the primary goal. The primary goal is convincing them to not hurt themselves or anyone else. But ideally, with anyone we're working with, we want to get them to, leave behind ideologies that dehumanize other people.
I want to ask you, you said you guys don't like the word de-radicalization. What is the reason for that?
Just because it gets kicked around a lot, and how did you radicalize? How did you de-radicalize? It's so multifaceted that using such a singular term it doesn't really capture all the nuance that's involved. But one of my colleagues calls it D&D, disengagement and de-radicalization, and it just
you kind of have to de-radicalize or disengage before you could ever de-radicalize, which is
right.
True. And and that sort of extreme thinking doesn't happen overnight either, right? There's steps that are taken. Like you can see in the last few years with Trump coming into presidency and sort of ripping the Band-Aid off of this stuff and making it more out there in the open. But I mean, the folks that got into QAnon, the folks that got into being Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, whatnot, a lot of those folks didn't start out from that place, but they got into these like Telegram chat rooms once they got kicked off Facebook. They just kept getting exposed to more extreme ideology, and that just sort of keeps getting more normalized. And then they get into this echo chamber where that's all they hear, and they just think that not everybody thinks this way. So, I can see how that sort of happens. And I also see how social media currently is a big sort of weapon for them to use, or recruitment tools to use.
It's definitely an amplifier for sure.
Amplifier. There's a great word for that. Amplifier. That's exactly right. Do you think, Chuck, that it is worse now than it's ever been in our lifetime? Do you think that there are more right-wing extremists out there, that the neo-Nazi movement is growing, or is it just more out of the open?
I think it's just more publicly exposed because of the immediacy of social media. I think that, I mean, we have a racism problem in America. This country was founded on racism, genocide and slavery. And we have not been able to deal with that ever. Like, the civil rights era didn't deal with it. It's been, you called it a Band-Aid, the Trump ripping off the Band-Aid. And that's all it's ever been is, like Band-Aid on a wound that needs, lots and lots of stitches.
Yeah, that's right.
So I don't think that, I don't think that we're worse off than we were when I was in. I think it's equal, and I would say that if somebody back then were looking back, they would say the same thing. It's, obviously we don't have Jim Crow anymore, but we have a system of mass incarceration that,
that has replaced it. Yeah.
It has replaced it, and it's aimed at Black and brown folks. And all you have to do is look at who's in prison for the war on drugs, and it's undeniable. And it's a system that allows them to be discriminated against. I know this for a fact because I've been part of that system. I've been in prison. I'm a convicted felon. I know that the things that there's about legal discrimination against convicts are true because I've lived it. I haven't lived it like a Black or a brown person does, though, and they live it in a much, much more intense reality than we do, because so many more Black and brown folks have suffered to it. Entire communities where 60-70% of the men in the community have been at one time under the control of the state system and are branded felons forever. So we have a problem that really needs to get dealt with. That's way outside the scope of talking about life after hate and saving people from white supremacist groups, though. So
no, right, because the systemic racism, it encompasses all sorts of racism, not just the extreme versions of it, right? So
right, and I like something that I've kind of been formulating in my mind for a while is that these extremist groups are like a proof of that system. They're a byproduct of the system. They're a response to the system, losing parts of its power, and that's why these groups exist in the first place. So anyway.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I want to ask you, I want to go kind of backtrack a second and go a little bit deeper on this idea of infiltration, right? So it wasn't just Tom Metzger that had this idea. Richard Spencer has also put this idea forth, as other white supremacists have, that the way you really push that narrative forward is to get involved in the military, get involved in law enforcement, get involved in politics, forms of government. And I do think that there's been some success there. I think there has been an increase of these individuals entering these fields and doing so successfully. I think we've seen the outcome of that in many ways. I think January 6th is part and parcel to that. How extensive do you think this problem is? I did look at a poll that was in the Military Times, which is the big publication, and they said that a third of all of the people all of the military folks that they asked in the poll said that they have seen blatant white supremacy at some point in their military career. That's that's a stunning number. A third? That's a lot.
Yeah, and when they narrowed it down to people of color that they interviewed, it was 50%. So that same article.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a huge problem, but it's not a newly huge problem. It's been a huge problem. I just think it's, I will say that there is like a more out in your face kind of view of it right now because of the Trump presidency and people like, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and all the nonsense they're doing, which is, just like right out of our recruitment playbook from when I was recruiting for Warskins and Hammerskins.
Is it sort of like red pilling in the sense that you give them a little bit of like, maybe white people are the victims of hate crime too, then it gets to the next level? Is it sort of like that?
Yeah, I mean, there are incremental things, like immigration as a wedge, that's
immigration.
It's a pretty, like seemingly innocuous issue when you're talking about, but really, they're talking about brown immigration. They're not talking about white immigration.
No,
they never have been.
Exactly. That's right.
Anyway.
That's right. No, I agree with you on that. They're not talking about white immigration. And in fact, so I did want to also ask about, 2017, the Trump administration, there had been some programs that were being financed by the Obama administration to do the sort of work that you do in the area of trying to tamp down on right-wing extremism, to pull people out of those positions, supply support for these folks, right? And I know Life Against Hate was one of the grantees at that time that lost their grant because Trump came into office, put all of that stuff under review, and then they decided they weren't going to finance, I think it was about $10 million worth of these programs. I think that didn't get a lot of publicity at the time. This was 2017, but the effects of that are really clear, right? So to me, this was one more sign that Trump was okay with these folks, right? Also, my understanding that it was that Sebastian Gorka's wife was in charge of overseeing that. Do you have any thoughts on that? Were you there at the time? Did you witness any of this?
I did, yeah. I was,
Okay.
I was volunteering with Life After Hate. I was very aware of that when it happened. I know the reasons that it happened. I really won't go into them. Yeah, it was Sebastian Gorka and through his wife that were monitoring that, and they used a very flimsy excuse for pulling the grant. But in the end, it really didn't hurt Life After Hate's mission. They Colin Kaepernick donated some money shortly thereafter. Right. Lots of people donated money, and so Life After Hate at the time actually ended up getting more than from the grant. So
there you go. The unintended consequences for you, Trump. It's interesting to me because Sebastian Gorka, he was kind of there for a hot minute and then he wasn't, but Gorka was part of a Hungarian neo-Nazi movement, and I think he had basically lied about that when he applied for his security clearances with the government. But Trump, but he wasn't the only one that Trump had appointed into these positions. At the Department of Homeland Security, there was at least 7 or 8, maybe even up to 10 or 11. I'd have to go look at my notes again, but there were several employees there that worked for FAIR, which was one of John Tanton's organizations. So FAIR is a group that is not only against, like you said, immigration. They're not only against illegal immigration, they're against all immigration. And in fact, John Tanton was an advocate of white nationalism, right? He wanted to get rid of brown and black people from the country. So his one of his old executive directors, Julie Kirshner, ended up being one of the top guys at DHS under his administration. So I felt like that was very damaging in the moment. But these are the subtle things that happen within government that don't make the headlines, but they do have a lot of direct influence on the way these things pan out. So I'm glad to hear that you guys ended up actually with more money then, because that's sort of backfired, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
So I wanted to ask you this too, it seems to me that hate is almost like a virus in the way that it spreads, right? So one guy gets it, he kind of sort of passes it on, and then 2 of his friends pass it on. Like it just spreads like a virus does. Is there a way to deal with that head on and in a more preventative manner?
Yeah, I think, like when we're talking about what you're talking about is primary intervention, which would be, providing a better education for kids, not giving them the frankly, the Victor writes the history version of American history that I got when I was a kid, which was that, all these founding fathers were these, noble white guys who were so great when, the vast majority of them were slaveholders and not very good people, you know. I mean, like, you know, they did what they had to do at the time, and absolutely, you know, they had ideals, and some of them tried to get those ideals written into the Constitution, but there was a lot of compromise that was very counter to the ideal, you know, like the 3/5 compromise, you know, talking about, you know, the merciless Indian savages in the Declaration of Independence. The you know, a lot of people don't know this, but there's a clause in the Declaration of Independence where Jefferson out King George is inciting domestic insurrections.
Right.
Well, what they're talking about there is he was inciting slave revolts against against the plantation owners. So that's another little piece of, you know, direct racism that's in our founding documents that we just don't want to deal with the history of.
No, we just cover it up. Yeah.
Right. You know, and until we can, you know, like, an alcoholic has to admit they have a problem to start working on the problem, right? You know, America has to admit that we had a problem in order to start working on the problem. We can't keep pretending like we're colorblind. We can't keep pretending like, you know, everybody is a rugged individual and has the ability to pull them up by themselves up by their bootstraps.
That's just not the case. Yeah.
It's not. We have effectively, like, you know, made that impossible for huge segments of the population for the entire history of this country. So
yeah, I don't disagree. I think fascism is directly correlated with income inequality. There's just no two ways about it. If we want to deal with fascism in the country, we need to address more of the income inequality that we're seeing. And it makes sense that we've had an increase in it because we've also had an increase in income inequality. These things kind of go side by side. So then what is the best way for someone to address, so say you're dealing with right-wing extremists in your life, whether they're neo-Nazis or other types, but they're not ready to leave that world yet. They're still in it. They're maybe in denial about some stuff. There might be some signs there that they're not entirely happy with where they're at, but what's the best way to deal with it if they're not ready to leave?
Well, so this is going to sound hard, but one of the most common themes I hear from people who I know who have left, and I've known a lot of them, is that somebody in their life who they saw as the other, you know, somebody who was black or brown or Jewish or whatever the case, even though they understood what they were, they treated them with kindness and compassion. And so if you have somebody that you're dealing with on an individual level, if you can treat them with kindness and compassion and their heinous, horrible beliefs, you can potentially, you know, be the person in their life that shows them that, you know, there's another way than this. That being said, you know, if you know this person is going to be committing acts of violence, or if you're dealing with a large group of people or something like that, you know, call Antifa. You know, for real.
Right?
Like,
for real. Yeah.
Or the cops.
Right.
Know?
No,
I mean,
well,
if somebody's gonna commit an act of violence and you're aware of this, please inform the authorities.
I love that you said call Antifa. That was hilarious. Which is true, because those are the guys that are out there fighting with the Nazis. Really, and that's been the case since the dawn of the anti-fascist movement, right? I don't know that a lot of people realize that came out of Nazi Germany and you know, not just Nazi Germany, all of fascist Europe, really, at the time.
Yeah, the whole Antifa movement was born out of, you know, 20s, 30s, 40s Germany and Europe.
Right. So I mean, it's a tough situation. If maybe you need a little bit of both, right? I understand that you think that that's a hard thing to say, and it is, because most people are going to say to you, "What? You think I should be kind to a Nazi? Are you nuts?" But I could see what you're saying there. I think it is effective, because then the other person is no longer the other. They're like, wow, this is a real living human being that was kind to me. Why do I hate them? I could see how that could make you start questioning, in the way it did with you. Learning that your girlfriend was half Jewish was like, what?
Absolutely.
But I love
if somebody
that can't, you know?
Right. And and I will qualify that. I will say that, like, don't put yourself at risk to do that.
Yeah, 100%.
Obviously,
no. Yeah.
I mean, don't
don't seek it out. I
right.
think,
Well, and don't, if it's dangerous, obviously don't do it. But if you without putting yourself in danger, you can make the difference in someone's life. And the reason that is that if you're treating somebody as a human who is dehumanizing you, it's really hard to maintain that that cognitive dissonance of these people are subhuman when they're seeing that you're a human being, and it's a different dynamic, obviously, when it's group stuff in the street. It's an entirely different dynamic. So. Right.
No, that's definitely different. When there's like actual street fights going on, there's no way to stop that and say, "But I love you, yo." I mean, it's not gonna,
right.
Yeah, it's not going to work.
I mean, even that has happened though. There was a guy back in 2017 or 18 or something like that. I forget his name, but he was at some protest and he was a lone dude with swastikas on his shirt, and he was, people were kind of beating, punching on him and stuff, and a black guy came up and like rescued him, gave him a big hug, and the dude left the movement after that. And now
really, I love that.
Close friends, yeah. I don't remember his name, and I'd have to look up the story, but it's. I mean,
it could work out that way. It could go the other way. You never know. But I just, it just does make sense to me though, because they can't really other you if you're being a normal, kind, loving person, and then it's hard for them to create that caricature in their mind that they think that you are. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if you start seeing cracks, you can refer them to, Life After Hate or one of the other groups out there that is doing this work. Although I will toot my own horn and say that at least I don't think anybody has a comparable program to Exit USA. So.
And so how does that actually work out? So there's some cracks forming there. So if a loved one contacts you, not necessarily the Nazi, contacts you and said, hey, my son who's been involved in this extremism, I think he's starting to see the light. Will you come and talk to him? Is that sort of how it goes?
Kind of. We do have a friends and family component. And so, yes, people who are friends or family can contact us. We will actually work with them and counsel them. And in the hopes that they can get the person to agree to also be counseled.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the majority of our clients are self-referred clients who come to us for a variety of reasons. Some of them have recently gotten in trouble or are afraid of the consequences. Some of them have been doxxed. Some of them are just disillusioned and want to get out. Some of them have been out for a number of years or longer than that and are just looking for some help trying to figure out how to be able to relate their past to the world because they don't talk about it with anybody.
Right, which isn't really hard. Yeah, that's unhealthy, hard, yeah.
It's a hard thing to carry. I mean, I did that for 10 plus years until I met the guys from Life After Hate. I really didn't talk to anybody about my whole thing, and I was isolated and it was pretty hard to deal with. So.
That makes perfect sense. So Chuck, I want to ask you where people can find you if somebody watches this and they have somebody they want to get help with. Where should they contact? All that kind of information.
So they can check out our Life After Hate website. It's lifeafterhate.org.